The door slammed so hard that the walls seemed to shiver. A framed photo tilted on the hallway table, catching the light before settling crooked. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen, my hands resting on the arms of the old chair I had painted myself 2 summers ago. Her voice still echoed down the hall like a sharp crack, cutting through morning calm. "You are just a guest here." There are sentences that bruise more than any slap. This was one of them. I kept my eyes fixed on the soft grain of the floor. My slippers were still damp from washing the porch. The scent of soap and wet pine wood lingered in the air. I listened to the silence that followed, the kind that spreads through a house after an argument, thick and choking. Upstairs, I could hear the faint shuffle of little feet. My grandchildren always woke early, curious about everything, innocent of the storm downstairs. I sat there until my breath slowed, until the sting behind my eyes faded. Then I looked around the living room, Harper's house, though my hands had scrubbed every corner. The cushions on the couch were still warm from her presence. The curtains I had hemmed swayed gently with the breeze, and the rug beneath my feet still carried a faint mark from when I spilled paint while helping them redecorate. Everything around me whispered my care, but none of it belonged to me. When my husband passed 3 years ago, I left everything behind. The house we built together, the garden we planted, the bedroom that still smelled of him. I sold it all and packed what remained into 6 boxes. Noah, my only son, told me to come live with them in Oregon until I could decide what to do next. He said it like an invitation, full of kindness. I believed him. I wanted to. Harper had just given birth to their 2nd child back then. She was exhausted, her hands trembling from sleepless nights, her voice brittle with new responsibility. I thought I could help. I thought my presence would ease their load. I told myself that living together again would fill the hollow in my chest. I imagined laughter in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and toast every morning, the comfort of family after years of quiet widowhood. At first, it was just like that. I woke up before dawn, made breakfast, warmed milk for the baby, walked the older child to preschool. Harper would smile, tired but grateful. Noah would kiss the top of my head before leaving for work, promising to pick up flowers on his way home. The house was full of soft noises, the hum of the dishwasher, the creak of floorboards, the little bursts of laughter from the nursery. I used part of my pension to help them with bills. It wasn't much, but it meant the lights stayed on, the fridge stayed full, and Harper could rest without worrying about money. I told myself it was what mothers did, giving without keeping score. But love given without acknowledgement turns invisible. It started with small things. Harper corrected how I folded towels. She moved my mugs to a separate shelf. One afternoon, I came home from a walk and found my family photos moved from the main wall to a side corner of the hallway. A neat label under them read, "Mom's Keepsakes." I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. It was a quiet displacement, a message written without words. Your place is shrinking. Conversations grew shorter, meals quieter, decisions smaller. They started using a new group chat for schedules and errands, one I wasn't included in. I noticed when Harper laughed at something on her phone, her thumb moving quickly across the screen, the way she would glance up at me, then look away. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. I told myself peace was more important than pride. Then came the tone. The kind of tone that wears politeness like a thin coat over coldness. She said, "Thank you," but meant, "That's enough." She said, "Maybe next time," but meant, "Don't try again." My son still called me Mom, but his voice grew hesitant, like he was afraid to choose sides in a war he didn't want to name. I saw guilt flicker in his eyes when Harper sighed in my direction. I forgave him in silence. The morning she said it, the morning she called me a guest, I had been cooking oatmeal and slicing strawberries for the kids. The smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen. I remember turning to find her standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her phone in one hand. She didn't even look at me when she spoke. "You left the garage open again. Anyone could have walked in." I apologized immediately, but that didn't stop her. "Do you ever listen? It's like you don't think. You slow us down, you crowd the space." Then she turned her eyes on me, sharp and final. "You are just a guest here, Indigo. You don't get to decide how this house runs." The spoon slipped from my hand, clinking against the pot. I stared at the oatmeal, swirling slowly, the steam rising like fog. I wanted to say that I paid for the electricity that cooked it, I wanted to remind her that this roof existed because I helped fund the mortgage when they almost lost the down payment. But my voice caught in my throat, so I said nothing. When she walked away, I stood there alone with the smell of burnt cinnamon and something heavier humiliation. After a while, I carried the bowls of oatmeal into the dining room where the children sat waiting. They smiled when they saw me. My granddaughter's curls were messy, her smile missing a front tooth. My grandson reached for the spoon before I even set the bowl down. Their innocence softened me, made the ache inside quiet for a moment. They didn't see me as a guest. To them, I was still grandma. But when I sat at the far end of the table, Harper took my seat at the center without hesitation. Noah said nothing. The sound of spoons scraping against bowls filled the silence. I watched sunlight stretch across the wooden table, touching their hands but not mine, and I realized something I had refused to admit for months. This wasn't a home, it was a stage, and I was playing a part that everyone had quietly rewritten. That night, long after the house had gone still, I sat in my chair by the window. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the glass. On the table beside me lay a stack of unopened letters from the credit union. My name, written in neat black print, gleamed faintly under the lamp. For the first time, I felt the edge of something new rising in me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was clarity. "A guest," she said. I smiled to myself, a small, quiet smile that even the darkness couldn't take away. Because somewhere deep down, I knew guests don't build houses, guests don't pay the bills, guests don't hold the keys, and I had all three. I woke before the sun because the house was easier to carry in the dark. The floors did not creak as loudly. The radiator hummed like a tired animal. In the kitchen, the air smelled of last night's rain and the faint sweetness of apples. I tied my hair back, slipped on my old blue cardigan, and reached for the kettle. The faucet sputtered once, then gave me clean water. I watched the surface settle, then set the kettle on the stove and listened for the first soft ripple of heat. Making breakfast had become my quiet ritual. It steadied my hands and kept my thoughts from spinning. I peeled 2 apples and sliced them thin. I warmed a pot, melted a pat of butter, and stirred in oats with a pinch of salt. Cinnamon dust floated up and settled over me like a blessing I did not yet feel I deserved. When I opened the fridge for milk, I stopped. There was a row of plastic containers, each marked with neat black letters across white tape. For Noah only, kids' lunch, do not touch, almond milk, Harper only. My apples from yesterday had been moved to the lowest drawer. My milk had been replaced with the carton that made Harper feel better about herself. On the egg carton, a small yellow note waited like a warning. Please use your own groceries. I held the door with one hand and the note with the other. The cold seeped into my skin. The message was simple and almost kind in tone, which made it worse. I closed the fridge and stood very still. The kettle began to whisper. I let it. Then I folded the note and tucked it into my cardigan pocket as if it were a receipt for a purchase I had not agreed to make. The children shuffled in a few minutes later, warm and sleepy. I set bowls in front of them and watched their faces brighten. They ate with the urgency of small people who believe the day will never end. My granddaughter asked if she could have the last of the cinnamon sugar. I nodded. She grinned, then paused as if she had remembered an important rule, and glanced toward the doorway. Harper entered with her phone in her palm and the look of someone already late. She did not notice the pause. She poured herself coffee and scrolled, thumb moving quickly. Without looking up, she asked if anyone had seen her gray sweater. Noah came down the stairs, tying his shoes. He kissed the top of her head, then looked at me and opened his mouth as if to say something more. He did not. The words shrank back behind his teeth. Breakfast passed in a quiet rhythm. Spoons tapped bowls. Chairs scraped. The children told me a story about a paper crown they made in class. Harper announced a new schedule for pickups and drop-offs, then mentioned a parent meeting I had not heard about. When I asked for the time, she said she would text me. She did not. They curled into the day and slid out the door in layers. The house exhaled the moment the latch clicked shut. I stood in the kitchen with my hands on the back of a chair and counted to 10. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. A distant crow called, and another answered. I washed bowls. I wiped the counter until it shone. I folded a dish towel and draped it over the oven handle. Then I went to the hallway and faced the small shelf where my pictures lived now. There I was in a blue dress, on the day Noah graduated, smiling wide enough to swallow the sun. There I was in the hospital corridor with my arm around a coworker, both of us tired and proud. There I was, in a cheap frame from the drugstore, standing next to the man I married when we were only brave and 24. We were holding a paint roller and pretending we knew how to build a life from drywall and hope. I pressed my fingertips against the glass and left a small fog print that faded as quickly as it came. By mid-morning, the house felt unfamiliar, like a hotel someone else had decorated to look like a home. I did the laundry because clean fabric makes even strangers feel a little safer. I carried a basket up the stairs and paused at the doorway of the guest room. The bedspread was smooth. The window overlooked the cedar in the yard. From this angle, I could see a slice of the street and the top edge of the mailbox with its little red flag. I stood there for a long time with a towel in my hands and a thought in my mouth that I did not speak. My phone buzzed. A calendar notification popped up with an old thread title that no one used anymore. I opened messages and scrolled. Same way you press on a bruise to see if it still hurts. The family chat was quiet. A new thread existed. I knew it did. I could feel the outline of it the way you feel the outline of a door in a dark room. I closed the app and set the phone face down. At noon I made tea, Earl Grey, with a curl of lemon peel. I carried the cup to the dining table and sat with my back to the window, the light falling across the wood like a river that never asked permission to flow. I placed a small folder beside the cup. The folder had traveled with me through 3 moves and 1 wild storm of grief. I ran my thumb along the edge and felt the familiar ridged paper. Not yet, I told myself. Not from anger, not because you want to win. Only when you are ready to see clearly. A car passed outside. A dog barked once, then gave up. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked with the soft patience of someone who has all the time in the world. I opened the folder and closed it again. It was enough to remember it existed. Paper has weight, even when you do not lift it. In the afternoon, I stepped out for air. The rain had stopped, and the street smelled clean. The cedars brushed the sky with their dark tips. I walked to the corner and back, past the neighbor who always waved, as if waving counted as a friendship. She asked how I was. I said I was fine because that is what women say when there is nothing to be gained from the truth. She touched my elbow gently and told me I looked strong. I thanked her. Maybe I did. Maybe strength is just the name we give to a body that keeps moving, while the heart reorganizes its furniture. When I returned, I found a delivery on the porch, a box addressed to Harper with the word fragile printed on the side. I carried it in and set it near the couch. The old chair I loved sat across from it, steady and unassuming, the paint still bright in the curve of the arms. I ran my palm along the smooth edge and felt my breath ease. The house could take away places, but it could not take away the way my hands remembered work. Evening came like a slow tide. The children burst through the door with backpacks and stickers and wet shoes. They told me about a science experiment with baking soda and vinegar. They asked for snacks, then ate too fast and asked for more. Life kept insisting on itself in their presence. I lowered myself to their level and listened as if language were made of gold. Harper arrived behind them, hair pulled tight, eyes the color of a screen at midnight. She thanked me for watching them. The thanks landed between us and did not break the distance. She noticed the delivery and smiled at the box, then at her phone, then at her reflection in the blank television, like all 3 were extensions of the same approval. Noah came in later, damp around the edges, stuck between guilt and habit. He murmured something about a new project and a late meeting. He rubbed the back of his neck and avoided my eyes when Harper sighed. I told him to eat before the food went cold. He said he would. He did not. Dinner was simple: roasted vegetables, brown rice, the kind of meal that fills a room with quiet comfort. I set the table and placed forks with their tines, facing the same way because small order creates small peace. We ate without the old laughter. Harper talked about a brand partnership and deadlines. Noah nodded and promised to fix the cabinet hinge. The children asked if they could build a fort after. I told them yes. I promised I would help drape the blankets. After dishes, I found a blanket missing from the basket. Later, I saw it in the dog crate. The dog looked very pleased. I could not blame him. Comfort goes where it is allowed. I replaced the blanket with an older one. We built a fort anyway. We pulled the chairs close and made a roof from sheets and hope, The children crawled under and declared it a castle. They invited me inside. For a minute, I let myself go small and crawl on my knees into a world where rules were softer and ceilings were made of cotton. When bedtime finally came, I tucked them in with old songs that knew their way around a tired heart. I kissed their foreheads. I stood at the doorway to feel the last line of their day pass across my skin. Then I closed the door and faced the hallway where my shelf of photos waited. I nodded at the past. It nodded back. In the living room, Harper had taken the old chair again. Her laptop glowed. Her fingers moved in quick rhythms. Noah sat at the end of the couch, rubbing a stain into the fabric with the edge of his sleeve, as if he could erase it by will alone. I said goodnight. Harper did not look up. Noah lifted his eyes and held mine for a second. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He gave me a tired smile that asked for forgiveness and offered nothing in return. I gave him a small smile back because I was not ready to call it what it was. In my room, the lamp lit a slow circle of yellow. The folder sat on the dresser where I had placed it earlier. I reached for it. My hand hovered. I let it rest there without opening it, the way you rest a hand on a door you are not ready to walk through. I could feel the shape of each document without seeing the ink. Numbers, signatures, statements that had followed me like faithful birds, paper that did not raise its voice, that did not belittle, that did not forget. I sat on the edge of the bed and untied my shoes. I listened to the house settling, to pipes ticking, to a chair leg moving somewhere under a shifting weight. I thought of my husband and the way he used to say that a person should always know where their name lies. On the deed, on the account, on their own tongue spoken with respect. He believed paper was not power by itself. Paper was a mirror that made power visible. I smiled at the memory and felt a calm climb my spine like a hand steadying me from behind. The night deepened. I wrote a line in my small notebook and capped the pen. I brushed my teeth and watched my reflection while the faucet ran. The woman in the mirror looked older than the one who moved here, but her eyes were clearer. She looked like someone who had stopped apologizing to empty rooms. I turned off the light and sat once more in the chair by the window. The rain started again, soft and persistent. The cedar swayed, as if it were finally tired of standing still. "You are just a guest here," Harper had said. The words rose up, then softened like stones under water. They were heavy when I carried them alone. They were lighter when I set them next to truth. I leaned forward and drew the folder into my lap. I did not open it. I did not need to. It was enough to feel its weight, and to know that my name was there in ink that did not erase itself to suit another person's comfort. I placed the folder back on the dresser and turned down the covers. I slid into bed and pulled the blanket to my chin. The house groaned and quieted. Somewhere a faucet dripped exactly 3 times. Then, the silence took the shape of a promise. "I am not a guest," I whispered into the dark. Not to myself, not to the life I built with both hands, not to the future that can still open like a door. I closed my eyes and let sleep find me. It came without bargaining, the way dawn comes whether you ask for it or not. In the morning, I would make oatmeal again. I would watch the steam rise and decide what to do with the day. I would fold the towels and put the cups where they belonged. I would be kind because that is who I am. I would not accept a story that made me small. And when the time was right, when the aim was clear and my heart steady, I would open the folder. Paper remembers, I thought, as sleep took me. And so do I. Morning broke like a gentle knock on the window, steady and polite. I lay awake a few minutes, listening to the soft scrape of branches against the glass. The house was quiet in that careful way that meant everyone was awake, just not ready to speak yet. I slipped out of bed, wrapped my cardigan around my shoulders, and went to the kitchen. The fridge light washed me in a cold glow. Labels looked back at me like little rules printed on tape. For Noah only. Kids' lunch, do not touch. Almond milk, Harper only. My apples were still in the lowest drawer, crowded by a bag of baby carrots and a jar of pickles. I reached for the regular milk I had bought with cash and felt the edge of last night's note again in my pocket. I did not read it. I already knew every word. I whisked eggs, toasted bread, and set the table the way my mother taught me. Forks on the left, glasses above the knives, napkins folded into soft squares that looked like they could hold secrets. When the children came down, I pulled out their chairs and let their chatter fill the empty corners. My granddaughter told me that clouds are heavy even when they look soft. My grandson said he dreamed of a blue fox that stole shoes and returned them as gifts. I asked if the shoes fit better the second time. He said yes, and grinned like a magician who has finally learned his trick. Harper appeared with a camera already pointed at her face. She greeted her followers before she greeted the people in the room. She filmed the plates. She filmed the sunlight. She filmed herself. When the red light blinked off, she set the phone down and said, "Good morning." Noah followed, hair still damp, jaw tight with the tension he tried to hide. He thanked me for breakfast and asked if I had seen his charger. I had. I handed it to him. He smiled like he remembered how. After they left, the house loosened. I washed the dishes and wiped the counters in patient circles. I took out the trash and replaced the bag with a new one pulled tight around the rim. The movement kept me steady. The work had meaning even if the thanks did not. I have always believed that care is the spine of a home. If you do it right, no one notices it is there. They only stand taller. That is what I used to tell young nurses on their first night shift. If they asked what it felt like to be invisible, I would say that some invisibility is a choice and some is theft. Choose it if it gives you peace. Refuse it if it steals your name. By mid-morning, Harper sent me a message asking if I could move my things from the hall closet so she could organize props for her next shoot. She used a row of soft words to cushion the demand. "Thank you. Hope this is okay. Just want the space to look cohesive." I replied that I would move my jackets to the guest room. She sent a heart. I moved the jackets. The closet looked larger without them. The hallway looked colder. In the afternoon, a woman arrived with a bucket and gloves. Harper introduced her as the new housekeeper. I stood there holding the broom I had already been using. Harper placed a hand on my arm and said I should rest more. I said I was fine. She said this would be better for everyone. I smiled and stepped aside, because arguments have a way of taking more from you than you mean to give. The housekeeper was kind. She thanked me for showing her where the supplies were. She worked quickly and left the room smelling like lemon. When she was done, Harper told her she had done a great job and said the house had never felt so fresh. I stood at the sink and pressed my palms into the cool porcelain until the feeling passed. Later, I went to pick up the children from school. On the bulletin board by the office, a sign-up sheet for a field trip fluttered under the air conditioner. I took a picture of it and sent it to Harper with a note asking if they wanted me to chaperone. No response. At home I asked Noah about it. He said they had moved the planning to the new thread so nothing would get lost. He said it softly, like a person excusing the weather. I asked if he could add me. He said of course. The next day I was still waiting. I began to notice that my helpfulness was only welcome when it came without choice. If I offered to clean, Harper already had the housekeeper. If I offered to cook, she had plans. If I offered to pay, she said it was not necessary, and then used the card that made groceries possible. When I asked if they wanted me at the parent meeting, she smiled and said it would be a quick one, no need to add another body to a small room. I nodded and stayed home and watched the light move across the living room floor like a silent procession that never looked my way. That evening, the children played a game on the floor and the dog snored under the table. Harper scrolled. Noah rubbed his temples. A lull set in, the kind that waits for someone to make a small mistake so it can snap. I cleared my throat and asked about the field trip again. Harper did not look up. She said she would handle the paperwork. I said I could pay the fee if it helped. She let out a small sound that was not quite a laugh. "We do not need a committee for lunch money," she said. It was said lightly, with a smile that acted like a bridge and felt like a wall. I took the plates to the sink. Water ran hot over my hands. I stared at the mosaic of soap bubbles and watched them break. When the kids were in bed, the house changed shape. It thinned. Silence crawled in with the night air. Harper sat on the couch with her laptop open to a calendar packed with color blocks. Noah did emails on his phone. I folded a stack of dish towels and placed them in the drawer by size. Harper closed her laptop and leaned back. "Mom," she said, using the word that always landed like a loan, "we need to talk about boundaries. I want everyone to feel comfortable. Lately, the systems we are building keep getting interrupted. Meal plans, storage, scheduling. It is hard to find order with too many voices." I nodded and asked what she needed. She met my eyes for the first time that day. "We need clarity about who decides what. This is our home. I love that you help, but decisions about the house should be our decisions. Our decisions meant hers said out loud, and his agreed to in private. I was quiet for a breath. She looked relieved, as if silence was consent. Noah stared at his phone like it was telling him a story that would save him. I said I understood. Then I asked if I could have a say in the small things that touched the children directly. Snacks, pickups, costs that appear at the last minute. She shook her head, as if I had asked for a deed to the moon. It is confusing for them if too many adults act like parents. You are wonderful as grandma. Please stay in that lane. I heard that word lane, as if I were a car she wanted to keep out of her mirror. I folded the last towel and slid the drawer closed. If you do not want my money, I said carefully, I will stop sending it. Her face changed a fraction. She smiled and reached for gentleness like a prop she knew by heart. That is not what I meant. Of course we are grateful. It has been helpful during transitions, but we are moving toward independence. We need to take responsibility for our life. She breathed in as if she had just given a speech. Then she tilted her head. I hope you understand. I did understand. Not the way she wanted, but enough. I kissed Noah on the cheek, patted the dog, and went to my room. I closed the door softly and sat on the edge of the bed. The lamplight made a small island on the quilt. On the dresser, the folder with my name waited with the patience of paper that knows its own worth. I placed my hand on it and felt the quiet hum beneath the cardboard, the way a power station must feel from the outside. Not loud, not bright, just alive. I did not open it. Instead, I opened the window and let the night air clean the edges of my thoughts. The cedar breathed. A distant train spoke in a long, low voice. I thought about the phrase invisible hands. People use it for markets, for forces you cannot see. I thought of all the invisible hands that kept this house standing. The hands that washed the sheets, the hands that paid the bills before the lights noticed they could go dark, the hands that taught small fingers to tie laces and hold spoons. I lifted my own hands into the light and turned them over. My palms were lined like maps. They were not invisible to me. The next morning brought a new rule taped to the pantry. Each person label their items. Please respect personal shelves. The word please felt like a sticker meant to soften the edge of a blade. I printed my name on a strip of white tape and pressed it onto a small section I claimed without asking permission. Flour, tea, a jar of honey in a glass bottle shaped like patience. The labels looked strange beside one another, like a family portrait where everyone stood apart. Harper breezed in and told me she had hired a babysitter for 2 afternoons a week so she could meet deadlines. She said it would free me up. I did not say that. Freedom offered after you remove a person's purpose is a different kind of cage. I nodded. She said she hoped I would use the time to explore the neighborhood. Perhaps I could join a seniors group at the rec center. She said it with kindness that did not require her to change. At lunch, I sat alone at the table with a sandwich and a glass of water. I ate slowly and listened to the radiator knock twice in quiet. I remembered a night from years ago when I stood in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. and watched a janitor polish the floor until it shone like a lake. I had thanked him. He had looked surprised. Most people did not see him. I promised myself that I would always see the ones who keep the world from falling apart. It occurred to me that I had forgotten to include myself in that promise. In the late afternoon, Noah texted to ask if I could take the kids to the park. Harper had a call. I said yes and put on my shoes. The air was cool and bright. The playground metal held the day's heat. The children ran in quick loops and returned to me like planets circling a steady sun. My granddaughter pressed a dandelion into my palm and asked me to make a wish. I closed my eyes and wished for something I could not write down. When I opened them, she said she already knew. You wished for us to be happy. I laughed and told her that was always wish number 1. On the way home, she asked why some people put their names on everything. I said sometimes people are afraid of losing what they think makes them safe. She asked if names could make things safer. I said yes and no and yes again. It depends on what the name is written on. Paper, a door, a heart. She nodded as if this were a code she would solve later. Evening came with chili simmering on the stove and the small chaos of homework. Harper filmed a segment in the dining room about productivity while the baby cried for a minute in the hallway. Noah took a call on the porch and paced like a man measuring a room he could not afford. I stirred the pot and tasted a spoonful and added a pinch of salt. The smell reminded me of winters when we still believed we could fix everything by sitting close together. I set bowls on the table. I called everyone to eat. They came in versions of themselves that fit inside the picture. Halfway through the meal, Harper told me there would be a storage project this weekend, and she needed the guest room closet. She spoke in a tone that sounded like a committee decision. I asked where I should put my things. She said we would figure it out, and smiled with her lips only. I felt something steady tighten in me. Not anger, not fear. A rope pulled snug around a truth so it would not slip. After dishes, I returned to my room and closed the door. I brought the folder to the desk and sat. I traced my name in black ink on the tab. The folder contained everything that people call boring until it saves them. Statements, letters, confirmations. The kind of documents that do not need anyone to like them to be real. I eased the cover open and looked at the first page. My name, my signature, dates lined up like a breadcrumb trail through the last few years. Paper has power when it is honest. Paper is loud even in silence. I read each line like a person reading the map out of a forest. I placed the papers back in order and closed the folder. I slid it into the drawer and smoothed my palm over the wood. Then I sat in the chair by the window and watched the street. A couple walked a dog that looked like it had opinions. A teenager rode a skateboard past and tried to jump the curb and laughed when he failed. The mailbox stood steady with its red flag down. The cedar swayed. The sky held its blue like a secret it knew how to keep. I leaned my head back and let my eyes close. I was not waiting for permission anymore. I was waiting for timing. They are not the same thing. Invisible hands, I whispered to the room. I see you. The next day began with a list on the fridge. It was printed and laminated and attached with a magnet shaped like a cheerful orange. The title said Weekly Systems. Under it were blocks labeled meals, chores, content schedule, budget. There was a line that read, Pantry Accountability. Another read, Storage Optimization. In small letters at the bottom was a sentence that asked everyone to honor the system with grace. I stared at that word grace and felt how sharp it could be when pressed like a blade. I made coffee and stood by the window until the first light pulled the lawn out of the gray. The cedar tree lifted its arms and shook the rain from its sleeves. Inside the house, the day arranged itself into roles. Harper warmed up her smile for the camera and tested angles in the dining room. Noah sat at the table with a spreadsheet open and the worried bend already at his brow. The children drifted between us like soft comets. After breakfast, Harper announced that we would be moving the guest room closet contents into labeled bins. She said it as if we had agreed last year. She added that the housekeeper would deep clean the room and the curtains should be replaced with something that diffused light better for filming. Noah glanced at me with the quiet apology of someone who learned long ago that looking sorry is easier than sounding brave. I said it was fine and went to the closet and folded my sweaters. The sweaters smelled faintly of lavender and long winters that had once felt like family. By noon, Harper had turned the living room into a studio. The ring light made everyone look like they slept. She filmed a segment about creating order in chaotic spaces. She said that boundaries heal relationships. She said that systems support love. She said these things while I carried my boxes down the hall and set them at the edge of the bed that used to feel like mine. When the housekeeper rang the bell, Harper called for me to open the door because her hands were full of purpose. I let the woman in and showed her the cupboard where the supplies lived. We worked beside each other for a while, trading small talk like folded napkins. She asked if I was family. I said I was the grandmother. She smiled in a way that said she had seen many houses that did not know how to say thank you. In the afternoon, I walked to the credit union to deposit a check. The lobby was quiet and smelled like clean paper. A man in a blue tie wished me a good morning and asked if I needed assistance. I told him I was fine. I stood in line and watched people count their pay with hopeful eyes that moved like flight. When it was my turn, I filled out the slip with slow, careful handwriting, the way my first supervisor taught me to write chart notes so that words would not be misread in the middle of the night. On the way home, I bought a lemon and a small jar of good honey. I liked the way they felt heavy in the bag. There is a comfort in carrying things you chose. Back at the house, a new label had been added to the pantry shelves. Grandma. The letters were tidy and centered. The shelf was small and low and shadowed by the boxes above it. I placed my tea there, then moved it to a brighter spot and returned to the kitchen. I could feel the label behind me, like an ankle weight. The babysitter arrived just before 3. She was young and kind, and wore a sweatshirt with a faded moon on it. Harper introduced us and said she was saving me some time. I thanked the girl and asked if she had allergies. She said only to almonds. I smiled and thought how funny it was to be allergic to something that pretends to be milk. The girl laughed, and the ice broke, and I knew the children would like her. With 2 free hours, I walked to the park without purpose. The path circled the pond in an oval that repeated until your thoughts slowed to match it. Ducks left V-shapes in the water. A boy threw a frisbee that never went where he wanted. A woman read on a bench and lifted her face toward the weak sun in a way that made me wish I knew her name. I sat near the water and wrote a few lines in my notebook. The words came easy until they did not. I listened to the wind and let the silence finish the sentence for me. Sometimes, not speaking is how a truth gathers strength. When I returned, Harper was filming again. She had arranged the shelves by color and placed a vase in the center and said that beauty is more than decoration. She said beauty is a structure for peace. The camera watched her with perfect attention. I stood just outside the frame and held a stack of folded dish towels and considered the kind of peace that asks certain people to leave the room. Dinner was late. Noah came home with that faraway look a person gets when his numbers are not cooperating. He kissed the children and told them he needed 10 minutes. He took a call in the hallway and nodded at words I could not hear. Harper stirred a pan and checked her phone between stirs. The children sat on the floor with crayons and drew a house with a big window where the sun always came in. They placed us inside the drawing and gave the dog a crown. During the meal, Harper mentioned the school email about updated tuition billing and how they had resolved it. She said, resolved like a door firmly shut. Noah nodded and said it had been a small mistake in processing. He did not look at me. I chewed slowly and decided to save my questions for a room where the walls were kinder. After the children went upstairs, I gathered plates. Harper leaned against the counter and began a conversation in the voice she uses for negotiation. It is clear and warm like a conference room that smells faintly of oranges. I want to acknowledge how much you have done, she said. These months have been a lot. We are trying to build healthy patterns. We want the kids to feel routine. We need clarity. When you jump in to cover costs or change the plan at the last minute, it confuses the structures we are teaching. We are not ungrateful. We just need clean lines. I set a glass in the rack and turned the faucet off so I could hear my own thoughts. A clean line can cut, I said gently. Her mouth tightened and then relaxed. She chose a smile. We just want everyone to feel respected. I nodded. The trick in houses like this is that respect is often measured in silence. Speak and you are disruptive. Help and you are helpful. Help without being asked and you are a problem. I dried my hands and thanked her for telling me what she needed. She seemed surprised that the conversation ended there. Noah reappeared and asked if anyone wanted tea. We both said no. I went to my room and closed the door on a soft latch. The lamplight formed a circle on the quilt. I sat, breathed, and listened to the quiet. My eyes fell to the dresser. The folder weighted like an unplayed note. I placed both hands on it and did nothing else for a long time. Sometimes the body needs to feel a thing before the mind names it. A little later, the children knocked and climbed into my lap with a book. We read about an island where the wind carves stories into cliffs. My granddaughter fell asleep with her cheek against my arm. My grandson traced the outline of the pictures with a finger and whispered that cliffs remember. I kissed their hair and thought of paper and stone and the ways both can keep a promise. When they were tucked in, I went down for a glass of water. The house was dark except for a sliver of light under the living room door. Voices threaded through it. I did not want to listen, but the words came anyway. Gentle at first, then clear. She cannot stay forever, Harper said. We have to think about the long term. Noah said something I could not catch. We cannot build around her, Harper went on. We have our system now. She gets offended by everything. The money helps, sure, but it is not worth the drama. If she wants to contribute, fine. If not, we move forward anyway. This is our life. There was a pause, and then Noah said, very softly, she is my mother. Harper sighed. She is a guest. We have to be firm, or nothing will change. The word guest landed again. It was duller this time, not because it hurt less, but because it finally sounded like what it was. A label chosen by someone who needed to stay in control of a story that did not begin with her name. I poured water and left the kitchen without making a sound. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the folder until the shape of it steadied my breath. My hand moved before my doubt could speak. I opened it. The papers slid forward with the tidy patience of things well kept. There was the letter from the advisor. There were the monthly statements. There was the confirmation with my name where it needed to be. I read slowly, lips moving a little the way I used to read medication doses at 3 a.m. I checked dates and totals and authorizations. I traced the lines of ink with the tip of my finger. My hand did not shake. When I finished, I tucked everything back in order. I closed the folder and placed it upright in the drawer, like a book that knows its chapter is coming. I stood, crossed to the window, and lifted the blind. The street was empty. The cedar lifted a shoulder and settled again. Clouds moved like ships that did not need harbors. Invisible hands, I said, almost smiling. There is nothing invisible about you now. The next morning, I woke before the alarm I do not set. I brewed tea and placed a cup on the table and wrote 3 lines on a slip of paper. I slid the paper into the pocket of my cardigan. I washed my cup. I wiped the table. I walked back to my room and sat in the chair and rested both hands on my knees. The day went on, as if nothing in its shape had been altered. Breakfast, shoes tied, lists updated, laughter rehearsed for cameras. The babysitter arrived on time. I waved to the mail carrier and thanked her for the way she tucks letters safe from the rain. I held the door for the housekeeper and asked after her mother, who had a sore knee last week. I was the same shape I had been yesterday, only the inside had shifted a degree toward true north. In the late afternoon, a new label appeared on the fridge. Budget freeze until further notice. Please coordinate. I stood and read the words twice. I looked down at my hands and thought of the folder, and the way ink does not flinch. It felt like the house had written a line it would soon need to erase. That night I slept well, not because anything outside had become kinder, but because I had finally told myself a truth and let it sit in the center of the room. The truth was simple. I had given for so long that they believed giving was my only language. They had not yet heard my silence. Morning would come, and with it dawn light on the cedar tips. In 2 days the calendar would hold a quiet hour with my name on it. In that hour, a call would be made, and a sentence would be spoken, and something invisible would become visible. I did not feel cruel. I felt awake. Paper remembers, I whispered, turning on my side. So does a woman who chooses when to use it. The phone lay on the table like a small black stone. I could feel the hour I had promised myself, approaching the way you feel thunder long before rain. I poured tea and watched the steam rise in a straight line, then bend, then disappear. The children were at school. Harper was upstairs filming a morning routine about serenity. Noah had left early with a promise to call that folded into the rest of his promises and hid there. I opened my notebook and wrote a single word. Ownership. The letters looked calm. I set the pen down and let the quiet do the rest. I had always been good with forms. Nurses learn early that saving lives is only part medicine. The rest is paperwork and patience. In the old hospital, I could fill a chart in the time it took a resident to find their pen. I could read a policy and see the gaps where people might fall. When the administrator complained about budgets, I smiled and kept the ward running with thread and will. On holidays, I baked cookies and wrote schedules that let the single mothers get home before midnight. We kept each other standing. We made a family out of hard floors and flickering lights. After my husband died, the administrative side of my mind survived, while the soft parts of me went quiet. I learned where to put my name so it would not go missing. I learned which numbers were fragile and which could carry weight. On the afternoon I set up the trust, I wore my blue cardigan and sat in a corner office with a man who spoke in careful sentences. He asked me what I wanted. I told him I wanted to help my son without binding myself to his fortunes. I wanted to give while I still had a voice. I wanted to be generous without the debt a gift can sometimes create. He nodded as if there were many of us. He explained the options and their risks in plain language and slid papers across a polished desk. I read every line aloud in my head and felt the strange peace that comes when a choice holds still for you. When I signed, my hand did not shake. The ink was black and sure. He said I could add money when I wished, pause when I needed to, and control every release. We set up a card for household expenses and a separate path for school payments, each one requiring my authorization. It felt almost like magic, except it was only paper, agreeing with paper. For a while I kept the folder on my nightstand. I liked knowing I could touch it in the dark. When I moved in with Noah and Harper, I tucked it into the dresser and told myself I would never need to reach for it except to smile at the safety it promised. I chose the rhythm of the house instead, oatmeal and errands, and festival days where we ate sticky apples on a blanket that smelled like cut grass. It felt good to give and not be asked why. It felt like proof that love could be generous without asking to be seen. The first time I understood that generosity can erase a person was the day my picture frames were moved and labeled. The second time was the night the word guest landed like a verdict. After that, the folder felt heavier in my drawer, as if the papers inside were quietly clearing their throats. I finished my tea and set the cup in the sink. The ring light upstairs clicked on. Harper spoke in a soft voice about gratitude. The house held the sound the way a shell holds the ocean. I opened the drawer and brought the folder to the table. The cardboard was warm from my hand. I could feel the edges of every letter inside, as if each were its own small door. I did not open it yet. Instead, I stepped outside. The air had that thin brightness Oregon sometimes keeps after rain. The cedar lifted and settled like a patient animal. Across the street, the neighbor in the blue cap waved and I waved back. A delivery truck rolled by and left a package on our porch. The driver smiled before he jogged back to his seat. This is what I wanted from a life in a quiet neighborhood, the small exchange of kindness and routine. It is strange how a life can look exactly right from 10 steps away and still feel wrong when you are sitting inside it. When I came back in, the dog met me with hopeful eyes. I scratched his head and told him he was good. He believed me. Animals do not require you to prove your place in the room. I put a pot of soup on the stove for lunch and sliced carrots with steady strokes. With each slice, I imagined a small ledger balancing itself. Time offered, time returned. Money given, respect kept, work done, voice honored. The math rarely adds up that clean. Still, the cutting helped. At noon, I called the credit union and was placed on hold. A calm piano played and promised I was important. I smiled at the old trick. When the advisor came on the line, his voice was the same warm baritone I remembered. He asked about my day with the gentle courtesy of someone trained to disarm fear. I told him I was well and that I wanted to review the account with him. He pulled up the file. He said my name. He confirmed my address. He asked me one security question that made me think of the creek behind the house where I grew up. The answer tasted like apples and iron. We spoke about the structure we had built. He confirmed I was the only trustee. He read back the rules we had chosen for releases and approvals. He explained what would happen if I paused the outflow and what would happen if I closed the card. The words landed slowly and stacked themselves into a simple tower of understanding. He asked if I wanted to make changes. I told him I would think and call him again. He said to take my time. He said I had earned it. When we hung up, I sat very still and listened to the last note of the call fade from the room. I opened the folder then. The first page was a letter with my name in a font that tried too hard to be reassuring. The second was a list of months and amounts that told a story no one in the house would say out loud. 2,000 here, 1,800 there, 300 for a field trip that should have come with a photograph. The grocery line items read like chapters in a book about a family who ate well and did not ask who cooked. I kept reading. Utilities, shoes, school supplies. A winter coat in a size that made me smile. Every transaction had been authorized by me. My initials sat beside each one like quiet witnesses. I ran a finger along a month where the total was higher and remembered a broken water heater and how Noah had looked at the bill as if it were a wave. I remembered patting his arm and saying it was covered. I remembered that Harper had posted a video that afternoon about resilience. I closed the folder and set my palms flat on the table. Paper is not love. Paper is a record of what love did. It knows who paid. It knows who chose. It does not ask to be thanked. It only tells the truth when you finally look. Upstairs, the ring light clicked off. A door opened. I heard Harper on the phone saying that boundaries were saving her life. I lifted the folder and slid it back into the drawer. Then I took a notepad and wrote a list that was only 3 items long. Confirm access, choose timing, decide what silence will mean. The decision did not feel like revenge. It felt like a woman returning a misplaced item to its rightful drawer. I cooked my soup. I ate standing up by the sink, the way nurses eat when they can. After I washed the bowl, I wiped the counter twice and lined up the salt and pepper as if alignment were a blessing. In the afternoon, the children came home with paper crowns made of soft gold craft sheets. They each gave me one and asked me to wear mine and pretend the dog was a dragon. I placed the crown on my hair and roared at the dog. He wagged as if glory had finally found him. We built a small castle from couch cushions, and I issued royal decrees about bedtime and broccoli and the kingdom of clean socks. They laughed until they fell over. The room felt bright and honest for the first time in days. Harper filmed a short clip of us and added music that made everything sweeter than it was. She did not tag me. She captioned it, "Family Time." Noah watched from the doorway and smiled, then looked at me with a question I could not yet answer. He went downstairs to check the mailbox. He returned with bills and the free newspaper that reports on car shows and farmers markets. He placed the stack on the table and left the room. I reached for the paper and scanned the date, then folded it and set it neatly beside the fruit bowl. Dates matter. They build a spine in a story that other people try to bend. Evening brought its usual drift. Dinner, dishes, screens, a bath for the smallest. Harper set up her laptop and plugged in a camera and scheduled posts for tomorrow morning. She told me we were doing well with the new systems. She thanked me for moving my things. She added that next month they would reassess square footage and consider a small shift in how space was used. She said the words slowly, as if the syllables were furniture we were carrying together. Noah rubbed his forehead and asked me if the children could stay home from aftercare next week to save costs. I said of course, and smiled at the dog when he leaned against my leg as if he could hold me up. When the house quieted, I returned to my room. I sat by the window, where the night pressed its face to the glass like a curious child. I took the phone from the table and scrolled to the advisor's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. I let it fall and then stop, the way you lower a bucket into a well and pause when you feel the cool change. I set the phone down and folded my hands. "Tomorrow," I said to the room that had learned my voice. Not with anger, not with a performance, only with the clarity I owe myself. I turned off the lamp and lay down. The dark felt kind. It did not ask me to shrink. It did not tell me where to put my cups. It did not label the shelf with my name and then pretend the label was a gift. In the dark, my body remembered how to rest. Before sleep came, I thought of the day Noah was born. The nurse placed him in my arms, and for a moment, the whole world fit under a small blue hat. I promised then to keep him safe until he could keep himself. I kept that promise for as long as I could. The new promise was different. I would keep myself safe even if he did not yet know how to stand with me. The math of love had changed. It had not ended. The house shifted once, like a large animal settling. Somewhere, a screen blinked and went still. I breathed in, I breathed out. The sound of the cedar in the wind scratched the window and then softened like a lullaby that remembers every verse. Paper is power, I thought, and it does not shout. It waits until you are ready to listen. I woke with a clear hour in my mind, like a small island waiting in the current. The children were still wrapped in their dreams. The house held its breath. I dressed quietly, made tea, and opened the blinds just enough to let a ribbon of morning through. The cedar outside looked like a tall witness. I nodded to it, then to my reflection, then to the folder on the dresser. I carried the folder to the table and set it down the way you set down a sleeping child. I did not open it. I only rested my palm on the cover until my breath matched the slow warmth in the cardboard. Then I took the phone and called the advisor. His voice arrived with coffee and kindness. We exchanged the small courtesies people practice before they step onto important ground. He asked how I was. I said I was ready for clarity. He said that was a good way to begin a day. He confirmed my identity with questions that opened small doors in old rooms. The street I grew up on, my first dog, the last 4 numbers on the card that bought groceries. We reviewed the account together. He read the architecture of it, as if we were considering a house built on clean soil. He said my name, trustee. He said my authority, soul. He said the rules, simple and intact. He paused and let the silence settle between us, so that I could hear the meaning of the words I already knew. If I pause releases? I asked. What happens in plain terms? He answered in plain terms. The card fails at point of sale. The automated payments attempt and then decline. The school portal requests another method. Nothing moves without my permission. Everything waits. And if I changed my mind, then it moves again. You are the river gate. He did not rush me toward a decision. He did not soften the power into something delicate. He only held the mirror and kept his own hands steady. I thanked him. He offered to stay on the line while I chose. I told him I would call back within the hour. He said he would be there. I placed the phone beside the folder and sat with my hands turned upward on my knees. I thought of the first time I taught a new nurse to thread an IV in the crook of an anxious arm. Begin with breath. Do not hurry. Honor the vessel you are entering. Precision is a kind of respect. I smiled. Bodies and banks are not so different. Both hold what keeps life moving. Both need a name you can trust. The house stirred. Water ran in the upstairs bathroom. Tiny feet thudded softly. A small voice asked for the blue shirt. Another asked where the crown had gone. I heard Harper's tone, bright for a camera even when it was not on. Noah spoke low, already apologizing to a future he could not see yet. I waited. This choice felt like a stitch that would hold if I placed it right. It should not be made mid-breath. Breakfast moved the day forward. I set bowls and cut fruit. The children told me about a school assembly with a magician. Harper took pictures of the plates and the light. Noah kissed the top of my head in passing and said he would be home late. When everyone left, I stood at the sink and let warm water run over my wrists until my pulse found a slower song. In the hall, I paused at the shelf of photos. My smile in those frames still knew how to fill a room. I let my fingertip trace the edge of one glass and pull back before it fogged. In the living room, the dog rolled onto his back and offered his belly with the kind of trust I once thought was only found in children. I rubbed his fur and told him I was proud of his honesty. I returned to the table, lifted the phone, and made the call. The advisor answered on the second ring and said my name with the calm of a pilot who has seen their share of storms. I would like to pause the releases, I said. I would like the card locked and the automated payments held. I am not closing the account. I am not moving anything. I am asking that nothing moves without my voice. Understood, he said. He repeated back my request in the exact words I had used. He asked for a final yes. I gave it. I heard his keyboard measure out the change. Then he said the phrase I knew was coming. Consider it done. He asked if I wanted notifications sent to my phone. I said yes. He asked if I wanted to schedule a review later in the week. I said yes. He thanked me for my clarity. I thanked him for his steadiness. We hung up, and the room felt larger. I did not feel triumphant. I felt aligned. I poured the remaining tea into my cup and drank it slowly. It tasted like citrus and metal. I washed the cup and wiped the sink. I walked to the window and looked at the cedar. It did not look back, or change shape, or applaud. It only stood and breathed, the way honest things do. Around noon, I baked a small peach cobbler because joy does not have to wait for justice. I wrote a note to the children in my neatest hand and tucked it under the plate. Enjoy, darlings. Love, Grandma. I set it on the counter, where sunlight touched the crust. Then I took a sheet of paper from my notebook and wrote a single sentence. Thank you for reminding me who I really am. I folded it once and slid it under the salt shaker in the center of the table. I took one suitcase from the closet and placed it on the bed. I did not fill it yet. I sat and made a list instead. Earrings, cardigan, the book with the blue cover I never finished, the small box of photos I kept hidden in the bottom drawer that held the snapshots no one else had seen. I added a line to the list that read, spare keys. Then I crossed it out. I would not need them. The door would close softly behind me, and I would leave the keys behind, because locks are not a language I plan to keep speaking. The children came home with the babysitter, while Harper finished a video in the yard. The babysitter loved the cobbler. The children loved it more. They ate with wide eyes and asked if there would be more tomorrow. I said maybe and kissed the tops of their heads. Harper came in and told the camera that good systems give families room to breathe. She placed her hand on a labeled bin for effect. I saw the phone light up with a notification. She ignored it. Notifications are for other people's emergencies. Later, while the kids colored, Noah checked the mail and frowned at a letter from the electric company. He set it aside the way some people set prayers aside. Harper scrolled past his face and asked if the ring light was still in the car. He said he would get it in a minute. The dog dropped his ball at my feet and waited. I threw it, and he flew after it with every muscle shouting yes. After dinner, Harper asked for the guest room closet by the weekend. Her tone was firm and bright. I said the closet would be empty by morning and watched the relief soften her mouth. She thanked me and said this would make everything easier. She did not ask what everything meant. In my room, I zipped the suitcase halfway and left it standing like a promise. I placed the folder in a tote bag, along with my notebook and a sweater. I opened the window and let night step inside. The cedar brushed the air. A train far off said something in a long, low voice that no one nearby understood. I turned off the lamp and let the room go gentle. I slept in short pieces of dream. In one, I was back at the hospital, walking down a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and rain. I held a clipboard that was actually a small boat. I guided it past closed doors, and it did not sink. In another, I stood at the edge of a field and watched two paths split like a wishbone. I chose neither and walked straight into the grass, which parted without complaint. At dawn, the house was quiet and honest. I brewed tea. I left the note under the salt shaker. I placed my keys where Noah would find them. I pressed my hand against the chair I had painted and felt the smooth proof of old care under my palm. I lifted my suitcase. It felt lighter than it looked. Outside, the air was new. A taxi waited at the curb with the engine running. The driver touched the brim of his cap and asked if I needed help with the bag. I said I had it. The cedar watched like a guardian who knows when to let someone walk away. The door closed behind me without complaint. The lock clicked. The sound did not hurt. In the back seat, I looked once through the window at the front step and the small welcome mat that had never said my name. Then I faced forward. The driver asked where to. I told him. He pulled away smooth as a comma. The house grew small in the rear mirror and then became another roof on a street of roofs. My phone buzzed with a message from the credit union confirming the pause. I turned the phone face down on my lap and smiled without showing teeth. I was not fleeing. I was finishing. I had given a house every soft thing I knew, and I had one hard thing left, which was the right to decide where my footsteps went next. The road curved and the trees opened and the sky lifted. My heart lifted with it. Paper is power, but the thing paper points to is older. It is the moment a woman names what belongs to her and believes herself. It is not loud. It does not beg. It simply stands and breathes. I breathed. Then I said my own name in my head, the way a person says a blessing before a meal. Indigo Hodges. It felt like a key that did not need a door. The taxi slid along the wet street, as if the rain had polished a path for me. Houses passed in quiet rows, front yards trimmed into careful squares, porch lights still glowing even though morning had begun. I watched the neighborhood loosen its hold with each turn. The driver kept the radio low, a station where a soft voice announced weather and fishermen's tides. He asked once if the temperature was all right. I said yes, and thanked him for the steady hands. I had not told anyone I was leaving today. There were no conversations to rehearse, no scenes to stage into closure. I had left a note that said only what needed saying. Thank you for reminding me who I really am. It was not a dagger. It was a mirror. If they looked into it, they would see what I had seen in myself these last weeks. A woman whose name still carried weight when spoken alone. We crossed the small bridge over Johnson Creek, and the city opened a little. Shoes hung on a telephone line like tired birds. A coffee shop set out its chairs as if arranging a ceremony. A man pulled a newspaper from a coin box and shook it open the way farmers shake sheets in the sun. Ahead, the sky lifted into a pale blue, and the clouds thinned to threads. I felt my shoulders tip backward, as if the day had taken its thumb off my chest. When we reached the turn for the building I had chosen, the driver eased to the curb so gently that the suitcase barely shifted at my feet. The apartment sat on a quiet corner where the sidewalk met a stand of old maples. The entryway was painted a cheerful green that did not apologize for itself. I paid the fare and thanked him again. He tipped his cap and wished me luck without making it sound like I would need it. The key slid into the lock, like a small affirmative. The door opened to a clean room with pale floors and wide windows. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and pine. There were no labels in the fridge or tape on the pantry shelves. There was no list on the wall, instructing me to respect the system. There was only a silence that listened without judging. I set the suitcase against the wall and stood in the middle of the room to watch the light move across the floor. It did not ask my name. It rested on me anyway. I opened the windows and let the outside walk in. A bicycle bell rang once and then again. Somewhere a dog barked twice and then decided the matter was settled. In the courtyard, a woman watered a pot of yellow flowers and hummed something that sounded like an old hymn. The maples spoke in their clean leaves. I leaned my elbows on the sill and breathed until I could feel my ribs open like a book. There is a peculiar quiet that follows a long noise. At first, you do not trust it. You wait for the next curtain to fall or the next accusation to find its costume. But nothing came. I unpacked slowly. A cardigan folded into the top drawer. The pearl earrings went into a small dish by the sink, the same dish my husband bought for me at a craft fair on a day when we never imagined we would run out of days. The blue-covered novel slid onto the windowsill, where it could remind me that unfinished things can still be faithful companions. I made a simple lunch, because simple things do not try to impress you. Bread, cheese, an apple sliced into moons. I ate at the counter and let crumbs fall where they wanted. When I finished, I did not wipe the surface right away. I wanted the kitchen to hold a trace of my presence for a few minutes first, the way a shore holds footprints before the tide takes them back. After a time, I washed the plate and dried it with a towel that smelled like lemon. I placed it in the cabinet and felt the small satisfaction of an object coming home. The phone buzzed once with a notice from the credit union. The card had been presented at a store and declined. It was a neutral sentence, dressed in polite fonts. I put the phone face down. Another message came through. Noah. Mom, did something happen with the account? The card is not working. Please call. The quiet around me did not break. I looked at the maple leaves trembling in a light breeze and thought of all the years I had spent replying first. I did not reply. Not to punish, to rest. In the afternoon, I walked to the corner market and bought soap, tea, and a small jar of marmalade that glowed like a captured sunrise. The clerk asked if I wanted a bag. I said I could carry it. On my way back, I passed a bulletin board outside the rec center. There were notices for Tai Chi, watercolor, a poetry circle that met every Thursday. There was a flyer for a group grief walk. There was a handwritten card that said, "Flat repair, ask for Luis, very honest." I smiled at the word honest. It looks humble until you have to live it. Back in the apartment, I made tea and took my cup to the floor because I had not yet chosen a chair. The sun had shifted onto the opposite wall. I traced its edges with my eyes as if I were mapping a coastline I would someday visit. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing to anticipate but my own breath. No footsteps overhead to brace for, no door slam to flinch at, no camera light to pretend was morning. My phone buzzed again. A new message from the school portal that tuition had not processed. Another from the utility company that a payment attempt had failed. The notices stacked like neat cards. I sipped my tea and let the information sit beside me without climbing onto my back. If they called, I would answer when I had a sentence I could stand inside. If they wrote, I would not educate them with paragraphs they were not ready to read. Silence is not the absence of love. It is the presence of boundaries. Near dusk, I walked down to the end of the block, where the street tilts toward a view of a shallow river. Children skipped stones and shouted as if their voices could make rocks float. A man played a harmonica with an ease that suggested he had forgiven more than one person who never asked for it. I leaned on the railing and allowed myself the luxury of being a witness with no duty attached. The sky folded into a deeper blue. The first star showed itself without ceremony. I named it Peace and decided that was as scientific as I needed to be. When I returned, I chose a corner for reading and another corner for thinking. I moved the small lamp twice until it cast a circle that made sense. I set the folder in the drawer of a narrow desk and closed it, not to hide it, but to let it rest. It had done its work. It could be paper again. I opened the bedroom closet and hung my cardigan on a wooden hanger, like a flag I did not have to wave. I showered and washed the day from my skin. Steam rose, and the mirror fogged and slowly cleared. The woman who looked back at me did not look young. She did not need to. Her eyes did not ask for permission. There were soft hollows where grief had once lived, rent-free. There was steadiness where apology had been. I touched the glass once and left no trace. I made toast before bed, because toast tastes like bedtime. When you are building a life again, butter melted into the bread and left a shining field. I ate, standing at the counter, and laughed, and the laugh startled me because it did not check the corners of the room first. It simply arrived and did not ask if it was allowed. The phone lit again. Harper, this time. A rough edge had entered her messages. Is this a joke? The electric company says we are overdue. Call me. Then another. We need to talk. The kids need stability. This is not the time to make a point. The words stood on tiptoe to look taller. I turned the phone over and cleared my dishes. I arranged the dish rack into its small geometry. I turned off the kitchen light and let the apartment fall into a soft blue. In bed, I pulled the blanket up and listened to the city wind down. My mind wanted to rehearse future arguments. I told it stories instead. The story of the first day I learned to start an IV in a storm. The story of the day Noah found a robin with a broken wing, and we took it to the shelter, where it learned to fly again. In that story, the bird did not thank us. It simply left when it could. The leaving was the point. The leaving was the gratitude. I slept well for a while, and woke once to the faint thrill of a train miles away. When I drifted back under, I dreamed the house I had left was a small boat I had kept upright with my hands. In the dream, I let go. The boat drifted, then righted itself, then drifted again. I stood on the shore and felt my fingers open and close in the air. In the morning, I remembered only the feeling of hands that were no longer numb. Day 2 began with light on the wall and the smell of coffee from the apartment below. I brewed my own and watched the steam rise like a blessing that did not need a priest. A message from Noah waited. Mom, please. We are trying to fix this. Can you just explain? I typed 3 words and then erased them. I put the phone down and opened the window. The maples shook out a few leaves as if it were releasing a pocket of old rain. I dressed and walked to the rec center. The woman at the desk wore a sweater with tiny cherries and a name tag that said, Alma. She showed me the calendar and circled the poetry circle and the grief walk with the confidence of someone who knows where relief lives. She told me there was also a Tuesday lunch where retired nurses gathered and swapped stories no one outside the ward believed. I wrote down the time with a pleasure that felt almost mischievous. On the way home, I bought flowers that did not match. Daisies, a stem of eucalyptus, a wild sprig that looked like it had opinions. I put them in a jar on the counter and watched their shapes adjust to one another. The apartment changed color around them. Places do that with small acts of attention. I warmed soup and ate by the window while the clouds rushed in from the west and the light jumped across the floor like a nervous animal. By late afternoon, the messages from the house turned frantic. A transaction alert, a bounced tuition notice, a screenshot of a declined charge, a voicemail where Harper tried to sound composed and failed. She said the word we, and the word need, and the word responsible. She said my name in a new way, full of vowels that asked for the part of me I was not giving back. I sat at the desk and wrote a sentence in my notebook. I am not returning to be a solution you refuse to learn. When evening came, I brewed Earl Grey and carried it to the small balcony. City noises softened at this hour. Laughter floated up in ribbons. Someone played a guitar that remembered 3 chords. A mother called a child in from the courtyard with a voice that held both command and love. I sipped and watched the sky turn the color of clean slate. I thought of Noah as a boy in a yellow raincoat, splashing in puddles, scattering light with his boots. I felt the ache, the way a musician feels, a note still ringing in the wood after the bow has lifted. I did not send a message. Love can be true and quiet at the same time. Before bed, I folded tomorrow's clothes and placed them on the chair I had finally chosen. A small thing, but mine. I opened the window a crack to let the cool into the room. I turned off the lamp and let the dark complete the shape of the walls. My last thought before sleep was not of the house I left or the bills that waited. It was of the maples outside and the quiet assignment they had accepted since long before I arrived. Stand, breathe, grow where you are planted. Trust that the wind is not always a warning. Morning would come, calls would come, Consequences would arrive at the door that used to be mine. I had not locked it against memory, only against misuse. The difference matters. The difference is the line that keeps a life from turning into a room where you hand out blankets and sleep on the floor. I slept and did not dream. The body knows when it is safe enough to rest without rehearsing. On the third morning, I woke before the alarm I did not own. Dawn had lined the windows with a thin silver, and the apartment felt like a held breath. I made coffee and stood at the sink while the kettle whispered. My mug warmed my hands. Steam climbed and vanished. I watched that small vanishing and let it teach me what leaving really is. Not a rupture, a release. A light drizzle followed me down the stairs and onto the sidewalk. The city smelled clean, like books and rain. A bus roared past, exhaling a gust that lifted the corners of the flyers on the rec center board. I touched the thumbtack on the poetry circle notice and made a silent promise to show up. Across the street, a bakery pulled trays to the front, and the air filled with butter and cinnamon. I bought a small roll and ate it with my fingers in 3 thoughtful bites. When I turned to go, a woman in a yellow scarf smiled at me, as if we were already in the middle of a conversation, and I smiled back because I wanted it to be true. The phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the utility company had arrived with the clinical grammar of systems. Payment required. Service interruption scheduled. I tucked the phone away. Another buzz came, and then a third. I let them layer like rain on a roof I no longer slept under. I walked home slowly and counted the maples between the corner and my door. There were 7. I liked that number. It felt steady on the tongue. I changed the sheets and made the bed with hospital corners the way my first supervisor taught me on a night when every bed was needed and the order of sheets felt like the only thing we could control. I opened the closet and moved a hanger from left to right just to hear the small wooden click. The sound affirmed a life in which small choices were mine again. Then I put water on for tea and answered 2 messages that had waited long enough. One to the advisor confirming our review for Friday. One to a woman named Alma at the rec center, a reply to her kind note about the nurse's lunch. I told her I would come. The afternoon brought a softness I did not recognize at first. I sat on the floor with my back against the sofa and let sunlight rest on my knees. I read the same page of my blue-covered novel twice because the sentences felt like cool stones in a stream. When the apartment grew warmer, I opened the window and let the smell of wet leaves drift in. Somewhere, a child shrieked the good kind of shriek, and somewhere a dog answered with a bark that contained no warning. The phone buzzed. Noah again. "Mom, please pick up. We cannot access the portal. They say the payment failed twice." The tone had changed from explanation to plea. I held the phone and thought of the day he learned to ride a bike, how he pedaled fast and looked over his shoulder and wobbled. I had wanted to run behind him forever, but had known even then that letting go is the only way a person learns balance. I put the phone down and breathed in to a count of 4 and out to a count of 6 until the ache turned from a blade to a stone and from a stone to a weight I could carry. Toward evening, I walked again. The sidewalks had dried and the maples had shaken off the last drops. I passed a thrift store with a window display arranged like a quiet hymn, cups not quite matching, a lamp shaped like a shell, a chair with a scar down one leg. I went in. The air smelled like cedar chips and old paper. I found a small table with a scratch that looked like the letter I. I ran my finger over it and smiled at the coincidence. The store manager wrapped 2 plates in newspaper as gently as a nurse wraps a newborn. I carried them home with more care than such cheap plates should require and felt richer than I had in months. At home, I set the plates on the counter and stepped back. They gave the kitchen an anchor. I boiled pasta and sliced a tomato and ate in the little circle of light as if the table were a stage and I had finally been cast in the role of myself. After I washed the dishes, I placed them in the new rack to drip dry, then left them there as a small act of rebellion against a voice that used to require everything to be put away before the steam had time to settle. Twilight brought its own lessons. The city dimmed. The apartment folded into hush. I lit a candle that smelled faintly of rosemary and let the flame find its steady shape. The phone lit on the counter, and I turned it face down. A knock came at the door, a gentle rhythm that did not presume. When I opened it, the woman in the yellow scarf stood there holding a loaf wrapped in brown paper. "I live across the hall," she said. "We have a tradition. when a new person arrives, the oldest tenant on the floor brings bread. I asked who the oldest was. She lifted the bread a little like an offering. That would be me. I laughed and invited her in. Her name was Ruth, and her vowels carried the echo of a different coast. We sat at the table and unwrapped the bread and ate it with butter and the marmalade that glowed like a small sunrise. She told me about the building. The person in 2B plays piano on Sundays. The person in 3A collects birds made of glass. The landlord has a soft spot for plants and may leave basil seedlings on your doorstep without warning. Many of us are women who rebuilt, she said, wiping a crumb from the corner of her mouth. We borrow cups of sugar and stories. We attend each other's birthdays, whether we like birthdays or not. If you tell us you need quiet, we give you quiet. If you tell us you need noise, we bring noise. You are welcome here either way. I felt something shift in my chest, a door opening onto a room with windows. Thank you, I said, and meant it with every past year that had taught me how rare such sentences are. Ruth asked if I planned to join the poetry circle. I said I might. She said it was better than church, and sometimes messier. She stood, kissed the air near my cheek, in a motion that made me feel European on a Wednesday, and left with a promise to return with Basil. After she went, the apartment felt different. My chair was still a chair, the candle was still a flame, but the air had been braided with another person's breath, and the room held it like a blessing. I walked to the window and leaned my forehead against the cool glass and told myself out loud that I was allowed to be this happy without anyone else's permission. The messages from the house grew more urgent after 8. Screenshots of balance summaries, a photo of a bill with the word "past due" in a red box. Harper sent a voice message that began in a level voice and slid toward the tremble she did not let her audience hear. She said, "We need to be adults about this." And then she said, "Please," and then she said, the children's names, as if they were keys that could open a lock in me. I deleted the message without listening to the last 10 seconds, because I know how a plea can become a hook, and I have become careful about where I let hooks rest. I showered and brushed my hair and put on the pearl earrings because they catch the light in a way that suggests I did not survive by accident. I climbed into bed and read 2 pages by lamplight. Then I turned off the lamp and spoke my new bedtime prayer into the dark. Thank you for quiet. Thank you for choosing. Thank you for hands that still know how to hold without breaking. In the morning, I woke to rain and the softer color it gives to everything. I made oatmeal and ate it with a slice of the last pear. I washed the pot and left it to dry. I dressed in my blue cardigan and carried an umbrella that clicked open with satisfying certainty. At the rec center, the nurses' lunch had already begun. The room was full of voices and the gentle clatter of forks on cheap plates. A long table held casseroles, named on index cards, in pens of different colors. Alma waved me toward a seat between 2 women who introduced themselves as Marta and Joe. Their hands had the look my hands had, a history of work baked in, and softened only by time. We talked in the way nurses talk, a blend of gallows and grace. We traded stories about ridiculous policies and moments of quiet heroism that no one filmed. We spoke the names of patients we had carried with us for decades without meaning to. The laughter shook the table, and the silence that followed certain sentences felt holy. When the hour ended, Alma touched my shoulder and asked if I would be willing to help another woman review her paperwork. She said the woman suspected her son had rearranged certain things without telling her. I said yes before I could think to hedge. We set a time for next week. Alma squeezed my hand. "You look lighter than the woman who walked in," she said. I told her I felt like a house that had finally found its foundation. On my way home, I bought a small rug that fit the space between the sink and the stove. It was the color of good olives. I laid it down and stepped onto it and felt my body thank me through the soles of my feet. The dog from the courtyard stuck his nose through the open door and sniffed the edge of the rug as if to bless it. His owner apologized. I told her, there are worse priests. The phone was quiet until late afternoon. Then it buzzed once, twice, a flurry that turned the counter into a tiny beehive. I glanced at the first message, the card, the school, the electric line. I put the phone in the drawer and closed it because I could not carry other people's alarms and my own steadiness at the same time. I made soup. I stirred with slow circles and watched the broth turn a deeper color. The recipe was simple: onion, carrot, a shake of paprika. Patience. Twilight again. The candle again. Ruth again, this time with a basil plant and a joke about stubborn neighbors who pretend they do not need basil and then cry when the tomatoes arrive. We laughed and I told her about the nurse's lunch, and she told me about a book club that meets every other Friday, where the only rule is that you are allowed to hate the book as long as you say so kindly. She asked me how I was really, the way people do when they have room for the answer. I told her I felt both brave and tired. She said both is a good sign. It means you have not mistaken adrenaline for courage. After she left, I opened the drawer and looked at the phone. One message waited from Noah with no punctuation. I miss you, Mom. He had always forgotten punctuation, as if he trusted the reader to supply the pauses. My throat tightened and then eased. I typed a reply and deleted it. I sat with the feeling until it was not the only thing in the room. Then I typed again. I am safe. We can meet for coffee next week. Neutral ground. He answered with a yes so fast that I could see his hand in motion. Night came, and I dressed the basil in a clean jar like a guest of honor. I turned off the lights and stood at the window while the streetlights did their quiet work. In the house I had left, the lights might be off by now because the bill had grown teeth. A part of me reached across the distance to tuck blankets and silence alarms that are not mine anymore. I pulled that part back gently, as if it were a child leaning too far over a railing. Sleep did not come right away. I lay listening to the small mechanics of the building. Pipes knocking, elevators humming, steps pausing in halls. I thought of the trust account and how numbers can be a kindness until they teach you who is kind. I thought of the folder in the desk and felt grateful that it could be still. I thought of the word guest and how, in this new place, it meant something beautiful. A person welcomed, a person expected, a person given a seat at a table without earning it with pain. When sleep finally arrived, it moved across me like a tide on a quiet shore. In the morning, I woke rested, like a page that has finally turned. I brewed tea and wrote 3 small lists. Things I love, things I am no longer willing to carry, things I will build. The lists were not long. They did not need to be. I set the paper beside the plant and watched the basil reach toward the window as if it knew where light lives, without being told. Later, as the day found its rhythm, another message arrived from the house. It was softer than the others. We need you. I read it twice, then wrote a sentence in my notebook that felt like a string around a truth, so I would not lose it in the dark. Need is not the same as respect. Help is not the same as belonging. I closed the notebook and placed my palm on the cover, the way you place a hand on a friend's shoulder when words would only cheapen the moment. In the afternoon, I swept the floor and watered the plant and walked the long way to the market for lemons. At the corner, a boy sold drawings of birds he had made with colored pencils. I bought one that looked like a robin and taped it inside the cupboard where spices live, because it pleases me to find small red wings when I reach for cumin. On the way back, I passed a window where 2 women were teaching a child to waltz on slippered feet. I stood in the rain and watched until the rhythm carried me forward. Evening laid its hand on the city. I lit the candle, set water to boil, and laid out the plates that should have cost more. I was not waiting for an apology. I was not waiting for permission. I was not even waiting for time. I was simply living inside a room that had learned my name and said it back to me each time the door opened. The next day would come with consequences in other rooms. The card would fail again. The school would call again. The lights might flicker and go out. I did not rejoice. I did not mourn. I placed my attention here, where quiet hummed like a good machine, and basil breathed like a small green animal, and the maples kept their appointment with the sky. I sat down at the table, unfolded my napkin, and spoke my grace out loud. Thank you for bread. Thank you for basil. Thank you for leaving when leaving was the only way to stay with myself. Then, I ate, slowly, while the candle flame held steady, and the city made its warm night music just beyond the window. The first sign arrived at the grocery store, a mile from the house I left. I was not there to see it, but I could picture the scene as clearly as if I had placed the items on the belt myself. A stack of yogurt, a box of cereal with a prize tucked inside, fruit that made the cart look healthy, a candle for content, and a brand of almond milk that had its own opinion of virtue. The cashier smiled, the register chimed, and then it stopped chiming. The small screen turned red. The card declined, please try another. I know the way cheeks heat when a life that has been careless with its math meets a number that will not pretend. I know the way people look around to see if the embarrassment is contagious. I know the way a person who depends on performance will smile through a bruise and say there must be a bank error. Try again, please. The system tried again. It told the same truth. The card declined. Please try another. Later, at the kitchen table, Noah would hold the bill and rub the corner of the paper as if friction could warm a number into mercy. Harper would open the school portal and see the tuition line wobble, then flash, then demand another source. The electric company email would slip into the inbox with the precision of weather. Payment overdue. Service interruption in 48 hours without resolution. The money had not gone anywhere. It had simply stopped flowing past my voice. I did not watch it happen. I boiled water and poured tea into a white mug and took it to the balcony where air and light behave like kind neighbors. A bird that looked like a modest ornament landed on the railing and considered me. I lifted my cup to it, and it left. Work finished. My phone lit with messages that stacked into a small tower and then leaned. I read the first two and put the phone back down. Silence is not cruelty. Silence is a space where old patterns cannot hear themselves. I could feel the ache of the house from a distance. That ache did not call me by my true name. It called me by my usefulness. Usefulness is not a crime. It is only a poor substitute for love when love has forgotten how to speak. At noon, I walked to the market and bought bread, eggs, and a handful of rosemary that left my fingers smelling like courage. Alma waved from the rec center steps and told me the grief walk would meet at the river trail at 10 on Saturday. I said I would come. She tucked a flyer into my bag and told me not to bother with a long speech. My face was already speaking relief. Back at the apartment, I made a small lunch and ate it while reading a letter from Marta, one of the nurses I had met. She had written her number on a napkin at the luncheon and told me to call if I ever needed help moving furniture or mountains. The note was funny and serious at the same time, the way nurses are when they talk about codes and birthday cakes in the same breath. I placed the note under a magnet on the fridge and smiled at having a fridge that held only magnets I chose. When I finished washing the plate, I allowed the dish rack to be a mess. I did not rush to order it. Disorder can be a teacher. I walked to the window and stood in the quiet and thought about heat. Not the kind that comes from radiators and gas lines and bills paid automatically by a sentence on paper. The other kind, the kind that families make when they are not counting. The house I left had been warm for a long time because I stood close to its fire and fed it with both hands. When I stepped away, the warmth drained out of the walls like breath on a mirror. In their kitchen, Harper filmed a short video about resilience. The ring light did its tender work. You forgive systems for doing what systems do when you need to keep being brave. She smiled and poured coffee and turned the camera on herself and said that the week had been a lesson in patience. Somewhere just off screen, there was a stack of letters and an envelope that said "Past due" in a red rectangle. Somewhere behind the phone angle, there was a husband rubbing his temple and a child asking why the lights flickered last night. Noah texted me again. He had begun to write in complete sentences, as if he remembered that punctuation is also a kind of respect. He said he was sorry. He said he had not known how deep the well of my help went. He said he had made mistakes. I read each line. I believed him, and did not send an excuse for the years he had allowed another voice to tell him who I was. The babysitter canceled one afternoon because her mother needed her. Harper rearranged her calendar and canceled other people instead. The children watched a movie on a tablet that stuttered when the Wi-Fi decided to take a breath. Someone banged on the side of the router with the heel of a hand shaped by entitlement. The screen blinked. The house held its breath and waited for a sound that did not arrive. Quiet can be a correction. By evening, the kitchen that once smelled like cinnamon and soup felt cold. The chair I had painted sat in a corner, with a laundry basket sitting in its lap like a sad child. The dining table was bare. The children ate cereal because the recipe always works and costs less than mistakes. Harper held her camera up and declared a cereal night, the kind of carefree that is easy to post when you have forgotten the face of care. The dog went to where my blanket used to be, looked around, and lay down on the rug with a sigh that did not care for content. Around the same hour, I chopped onions in my own kitchen and did not cry because I had learned to cut them in a way that did not wound the eyes. I made lentil soup, and it tasted like the exact opposite of panic, Ruth knocked and came in with 2 spoons, and a story about someone who tried to buy the whole bakery case and then decided to be generous 1 pastry at a time. We shared soup and passed the salt in a rhythm that felt like worship. She asked me how I was not in the first layer of how. The answer slid out without breaking anything. I said I felt awake. She nodded and said, "Awake is another word for ready." Messages kept arriving from the house. Screenshots of failure. Urgent words that remembered I was a person who answered. The school portal asked for a different card 3 times and then stated there would be a fee if nothing changed by Friday. The electric company sent a clear sentence about interruption. The bank recorded attempts like a metronome marking out a dance someone else should have learned by now. I do not love my son less. Love that depends on obedience is a tool, not a love. The truth is simpler than the lists on the fridge. He had been shielded for so long that he did not know which weather was real. He had called my shelter a given and meant it as a compliment until the day it became a demand. He is learning. Learning is never graceful. I can allow him his clumsy steps without giving him back the legs that carry me. Night fell. In the apartment, a candle burned down by a finger and did not ask for air. In the other house, my old house, the candles that were once set aside for ambiance were set aside for need. Someone discovered the real cost of light when the switch did not reward a finger. Systems show you what you think you deserve. Paper tells you what you actually do. I slept easily. Morning came like a promise no one had to coerce. I wrote a note for myself on a slip of paper and tucked it into the vase of basil. Keep your yes for what feeds you. On the bus to the river trail, I watched people fold into their day, a ballet of cups and backpacks and eyes that found windows. The grief walk was small and honest. People spoke with breath that waited for the other person to finish. I listened more than I talked, a luxury I had denied myself for years. When my turn came, I said a single sentence. I left a house where I was called a guest. Silence answered me like a soft agreement. A woman with silver hair reached over and squeezed my hand. Sometimes, a sentence is enough. In the inbox, Noah had sent one more message. He wrote that he had told Harper to stop using my name as a lever. He wrote that he wanted to meet on neutral ground and to bring no demands. He wrote that he remembered the taste of my soup and the exact pitch of my laugh. I stared at the screen and let memory run its hand through my hair. I replied, "Coffee on Tuesday at 3, a small place near the river, no talking about bills, only about the children and the weather and how we can speak to each other without choosing sides." He agreed in a minute that felt like a year closing. Evening found me at the desk with the folder open to a page that did not ask to be read. I closed it and slid it away. The work was done. Power that is used properly does not need rehearsal. It needs rest. The basil breathed in the window. The lights held steady. My heart beat without looking over its shoulder first. The house I left would learn, or it would not. Some lessons arrive in envelopes. Some arrive in the echo of a door that does not reopen. The children will remember that there was a time when oatmeal and laughter were free, and that the price of love is not a label. If they ask me later, I will tell them the truth. I did not leave to punish. I left to stop the lie that made me small. I washed the last cup. I turned the candle out with a whisper. I stood at the window while the city breathed below. The word warmth lifted in my chest and found its correct home, not a thermostat, not a power line, not a balance due. Warmth is a room that knows your name and says it back to you without a bill attached. I exhaled, and the glass fogged a little and cleared again. Somewhere, a light went off. Somewhere, a woman learned to find the breaker box without asking. Somewhere, a man remembered a boy on a bike and a hand that let go at exactly the right second. Somewhere, 2 children slept with their crowns of soft gold paper crumpled on a nightstand that used to feel safe. I stood very still and made a promise to the pieces of me that once said yes to everything, never again without a yes to yourself first. I slept like a person who had finally stopped apologizing to her own bones. The day after the lights went out at the house I left, Ruth knocked and leaned her head inside my door without theatrics. She held a small bag of lemons and a larger bag of stories. She said the building's oldest tradition had a part 2. When the loaf is gone and the jar is empty, you refill with whatever keeps you human. We sat at the table while the kettle hissed its small arguments towards steam. She told me about her sister, who once thought survival meant catching every falling plate and now believes in letting plates break beautifully. When Ruth left, I wrote a simple recipe on an index card and propped it against the basil. Soup that holds the day together. Onion, carrot, lentils, bay leaf, patience. Cook until the house smells like an apology you can accept from yourself. My phone buzzed. The school message changed tone. It used the word urgent and the phrase immediate attention required. I tucked the phone away and counted my breaths until the impulse to rescue passed. The body learns to answer alarms it never set. The soul learns to let ambulances pass when the siren does not call your name. That afternoon, I met with Alma in a bright room at the rec center. Her friend, a woman named Therese, sat across from us with a folder of her own. Her hands shook when she unzipped it. She believed her son had added his name to a deed that was not his and taken a loan against it. We read the documents in quiet. The paper told the truth it always tells when you let it speak. Her name, her signature forged, a line that did not belong. We made a list of phone calls. We placed numbers beside names. We rehearsed sentences that would be hard to say. When she cried, Alma held her hand. When she finished crying, she laughed once, the kind of laugh that is a bridge, and said it felt like someone had switched the breaker back on in her life. We all laughed then, not because it was funny, but because the body needs a boundary between grief and the next step. Helping Therese did not feel like revenge. It felt like justice returning to a chair that had been empty. When we finished, Alma said I had a talent for reading what paper hides. I said paper hides nothing. It is people who teach each other not to look. On my way home, I passed a shop that repaired lamp cords and sold second-hand light. I went in and bought a small brass lamp with a shade that made everything under it gentle. The owner replaced the cord while I watched, hands moving with the ease of a person who can sew electricity back into a thing. He told me he once fixed an old desk lamp that had belonged to a grandmother who did crosswords every morning. When the light returned, the woman cried and then finished a puzzle she had left half done for months. Some light is a map, he said. I carried the lamp home like a relic. When evening opened like a book, I set the lamp on the desk and turned it on. The shade threw a circle of honey across the page. I wrote a letter I did not plan to send. Dear house that forgot my name, here is what you taught me. That anger is not the only way to make a wall stand. That generosity is a door that swings both ways. That love, without respect, is a story with a missing page. I folded the letter and tucked it under the desk mat where it could rest without insisting on an audience. At the same hour across town, Noah stood in a customer service line with a number in his hand and a worry in his jaw. He practiced sentences about mistakes and emergencies and transition plans. He did not say that the emergency was respect and the mistake was thinking a woman would keep paying to be ignored. He did not say that the transition plan was growing up in public. He reached the front of the line and handed the number to a clerk who had seen every version of this day. She spoke to him with the kindness of someone trained in triage. He left with a temporary solution and a longer bill. He was learning that solving a symptom is not the same as curing a cause. The messages from Harper shifted pitch. There was less certainty and more noise. She sent a string of shoulds disguised as apologies. We should have had a conversation. We should have known what you were doing for us. We should have made lists together. She asked me to return, only for a short time, only until the system stabilized, only until the content calendar stops wobbling, only until the card runs again. I read the word only as it repeated, and I heard its real name. Always. I wrote back a single sentence. We can speak when respect is the first item on your list. She replied with silence. Sometimes, silence is the most honest response a person has. I met Noah at the little cafe by the river on Tuesday, as promised. He arrived early and sat with both palms wrapped around a cup as if it were a rope thrown from a boat. His eyes looked older than last month, which is a fast way to age. He stood when I entered. He did not reach to hug me, and I was grateful that he allowed me to decide. I stepped forward and hugged him with the part of me that will always remember the blue hat. His shoulders dropped a fraction. He breathed the way a man breathes when the weather clears for a moment. We talked about the children. He told me about a drawing our granddaughter made of a house with a window and a table and 2 chairs. He said she had placed a small figure in the window and written grandma in letters that wobbled but stood. We talked about the river and the way it always looks like it is leaving and arriving at once. We talked about the job prospects that had turned into promises, then shadows, then lessons. We did not talk about the card. We did not talk about the bills. We did not talk about the woman who believed the house was a stage where she set the lines and gave out the applause. He did not ask me to come back. He asked me how I was sleeping. I told him I slept like a person who trusted the roof. He nodded and looked down at his hands. Before we stood to leave, he said my name without shame. Mom, I am trying to be the man you raised. I did not say that trying is the floor, not the ceiling. I said I can meet you here again, same time next week. He smiled the smile I remembered from the year he lost his front tooth, and said he would be there even if the sky fell. I told him the sky never falls, it only sends messages. The house I left, adjusted to darkness and light in unpredictable measures. Some nights the power flickered, then held steady. Some days the pantry looked thin, and voices grew sharp with hunger of more than one kind. The dog found patches of sun on the floor and worshipped them with his body. The children learned to ask fewer questions and draw more boats. Harper posted less and began to write long captions about gratitude and change. Her followers sent hearts and wisdom quotes. Hearts and wisdom quotes do not warm a room. Meanwhile, my life expanded along the edges that had been folded under. I joined the poetry circle and read 2 lines aloud, my voice steady, my hands quiet on the page. I went to a used bookstore and traded a cookbook for a slim novel with a map inside the front cover that looked like a river I had walked beside my whole life without knowing its name. I helped Therese make 3 phone calls and 1 appointment with a lawyer who had a kind face and sharp questions. I taught myself to make a lemon tart that tasted like ownership, sweet and bright and honest. Ruth declared it the official dessert of second chances. On a rainy Thursday, the credit union called to confirm the review. The advisor asked how I was, in that polite way that can feel like routine. It did not. He sounded like a person who had sat with many women at this hinge in their lives, and who had learned to remove every ounce of shame from his voice. We adjusted nothing. We confirmed everything. We added a note to the file that said, "Contact me first for any change requests." When we hung up, I felt the quiet victory of a lock that turns smoothly in a door you own. That night, I dreamed the house I left had a heartbeat that had been kept alive by a machine. In the dream, I turned the machine off and the house did not die. It learned to breathe with its own lungs. The breathing was ragged at first, then steady, then something like a lullaby played backward. I woke before dawn and stood at the window. The street belonged to the soft blue hour. The maples kept their posture. A woman across the way carried a sleeping child from a car to a door with a tenderness that made the air hold still. The next message from Harper was shorter than the others. It said, "I am sorry." There were no reasons attached to excuse the delay. There were no agreements attached to make the apology a contract. I read it and did not write back. Not because I am cruel, because remorse that cannot yet name its own pattern is a seed that needs to live in dark soil for a while before it can become anything. I hoped it might. I did not plant it myself. I kept cooking. I kept walking. I kept meeting Noah for coffee in the small place near the river, where the barista now knew our order and never wrote our names on the cups because he said names did not need ink when faces came on time. We began to speak of the middle years that had been blurred with survival. We made lists of what the children were learning and what we wished we had learned earlier. I did not carry his guilt for him. He did not ask me to. One afternoon, while I watered the basil, a small prayer rose without a plan. Let the house find its own heat. Let the children feel safe. Let every lesson that must arrive with the least amount of breaking possible. Let my silence continue to do the work my voice could not. I touched the leaves and breathed in the green. Across town, the chair I painted began to chip along one arm where a laundry basket had scraped it every day. Harper noticed the chip and ran a finger along the edge as if remembering that hands had been here before hers. She brought the chair into a better light and looked at the brush strokes I had left, like a signature that did not need letters. She set the laundry down and for a moment did nothing else. Then the moment ended. She set the laundry back on the chair and moved on. I set the small brass lamp on at dusk and opened my blue-covered novel to the page where a woman decides to leave a city that makes her small. The sentence waited for me like an old friend at a station. I read it and felt the warmth of a lamp that works and a room that answers. I put the book down and stood very still in the circle of light. The house without warmth is a house that teaches lessons the easy days do not. My new place is a room that keeps what I bring and does not demand more. Between them is a bridge I cross only when I choose. Sometimes I stand in the center and look at both shores. Sometimes I keep walking toward the side where the maples wait with the same patience they offered me. On the first morning I turned a key that fit. Before sleep, I wrote 3 lines in my notebook. I am not a guest in my own life. Silence is not absence. It is a boundary with a good doorbell. When the lights come back on in other rooms, I will not move my furniture to make space for someone who liked it better when I stood in the dark. Then I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the night hold me without taking anything I did not agree to give. The room at the rec center had windows that faced the river, and the late morning light came in like a kind guest who knew when to speak and when to sit quietly. Alma had arranged chairs in a wide circle and placed a pot of tea on a side table with a little sign that said, "Take what you need." The sign made me smile. I poured myself a cup and sat near the window where the maples kept their slow conversation with the sky. Women filtered in with folders and tote bags, and the kind of careful posture that says, "I am fine unless you ask kindly, and then I might not be." Some were my age, some older, and a few carried the new lines that appear when a person begins to understand the cost of pretending. There was a quiet murmur as they chose seats. Ruth arrived last, breathing like a person who had hurried and then decided not to apologize for it. She squeezed my shoulder and took the chair beside me. Alma began with the rules of our circle. Speak from the eye. Listen like someone is handing you a small, fragile bird. No fixing unless asked. No shame. No notes that will leave the room. She looked around to be sure we were all there with her. Then she nodded and said we would hear 3 stories today and leave with 3 actions for each story. The actions could be small. The actions only needed to be honest. Therese spoke first. Her folder lay on her lap like a sleeping animal. She told us what Alma and I already knew, that a signature had appeared on a deed where it did not belong, that a loan had been taken out by a hand that did not own the right to reach. She described the moment she felt crazy and the moment after that when she realized she was not. She held up a photocopy and her voice found a firmer floor. We passed the paper around the circle. When it reached me, I studied the pen strokes and felt again the simple rage that comes when a person tries to make ink speak a lie. I handed the copy to Ruth and met Therese's eyes. "You are not crazy," I said. She smiled, and in that smile I saw an entire winter thaw. We listed the actions together. Speak to the lawyer again with these 3 questions. Call the bank with these exact words. Freeze the record and add a note in your own language that will require your voice before anything moves. Alma wrote each action on a card in big, careful letters and gave the card back to Therese like a prescription that was finally written for the right body. The group clapped softly, not for the drama, but for the clarity. A woman named Nia went next. She had moved in with her daughter after a surgery and had stayed for 2 years because leaving felt like betrayal. She did the school drop-offs and paid the phone bill when it went strange and ate at a corner of the table where no one set a plate for her because she was always a helper. She described the day her grandson told her he loved her and then asked if she could please not sit in front of the good window because it made the video look dull. The room went very still. Nia looked down at her hands and said, she had not known where to put herself after that. Ruth reached across the circle with her eyes and said, "Put yourself where the air loves you." The group nodded with the kind of nod that closes a wound and opens a door. We wrote actions again. Ask for a chair that is yours and place it by a window that loves you. Make a budget that has your name on the first line. Meet with Alma on Thursday and practice the word no until it sounds like kindness spoken to yourself. Nia laughed and cried at the same time, which is a holy sound. She said she could do these 3 things. She said the word no quietly and then again a shade stronger. The circle breathed with her. After a break that tasted like tea and lemon cookies, Alma looked at me. "Indigo," she said, "if you want to speak, this is a good day." I had not planned to. I was content to sit at the edge and be the woman with a pen who knows where commas belong. But the light on the floor had drawn a curve around my feet as if the room itself had placed me inside a gentle line. I stood without standing. My voice arrived before my body moved. I told them about a house where love had been replaced by systems and labels. I told them about the fridge that separated milk into categories of worthiness, about the shelf that held my face under a neat caption that said, "Keepsakes," about the sentence that named me a guest. I spoke slowly. I did not try to make the story prettier or meaner than it was. I described a folder in a drawer and a voice on the phone that treated me like a person with a steering wheel. I said I had chosen silence because silence can be a sentence that ends a paragraph other people have been writing over you for years. When I finished, no one clapped. The quiet that followed was not empty. It held me up. Alma broke it gently. 3 actions, she said, and smiled at me the way a person smiles at a lake that has finally accepted its own depth. We chose them together, and they felt simple enough to carry in a pocket. Keep the pause on the account for a season long enough for new patterns to grow. Meet Noah for coffee each week, and speak only about the children and the weather, and trust that love does not need to log hours to be real. Help 3 women in this room read their paper until it speaks the truth they already know. The last one made me laugh. Ruth wrote the actions on a card in her round, careful script and pressed it into my palm. The card felt warm. After the circle ended, small groups formed like constellations. Phone numbers were exchanged with the gravity of vows. A woman with a soft gray scarf asked if I had time to look at her insurance forms. Another offered me a ride to the market, and then remembered I lived close enough to walk, and said she would walk too. Alma washed the teacups in a basin that seemed too small for the job, and yet got it done, which is something of a theme with women who have lived through enough. I stayed to wipe the tables. When the last chair was stacked, Alma leaned on the windowsill and looked out at the river. "You are good at this," she said without turning. "At what?" I asked, though I knew. "At naming things in a way that allows the name to stay." We walked out together and stood on the steps and let the day make its bright case for staying. I asked her how she had begun this circle. She told me about losing a sister to a silence that was not chosen, and how she had decided in her grief that the next time she saw a woman drift under, she would throw a rope earlier and teach her how to tie it on the right side of the body. We stood there a while without speaking. Some gratitude does not want words, it wants proof. The week unfolded with a new rhythm. In the mornings I walked the long way to the market and collected small necessities and small joys with equal reverence. A ripe pear, a spool of heavy thread, a postcard with a painting of a harbor at dusk. I put the card on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a fish and laughed at my own taste for neat symbols. On Tuesday I met Noah for coffee and told him about the poetry circle. He told me our grandson had lost his second tooth and insisted on writing a note to the tooth fairy that included a drawing of a dragon. We agreed that dragons appreciate letters with pictures. We did not talk about the card or the lights or the bruise that shadowed the house. We talked about the dog who had developed a habit of sitting at the front door around 5, as if he could smell my absence more keenly at that hour. On Thursday I sat with Nia at her kitchen table. We labeled 3 envelopes with a black pen. One said savings in a hand that wanted to hide. One said groceries in tall letters. One said my life, and the letters took up almost the whole face of the paper, and that felt right. We printed out the phone plan and circled charges that should not exist and called the number together. Nia spoke to the stranger on the line with a voice that surprised her. She corrected a fee. She ended a subscription no one used. She looked at me after and said it felt like opening a window. I told her it was. Friday brought Therese to my apartment with a tin of butter cookies and a smile that had slept better. We read the letter from the lawyer and the response from the bank. The bank would investigate, the lawyer would file. The words sounded firm without swagger. Therese touched the basil leaves with the reverence of a person in church and asked if plants always smelled that green. I told her they do when you water them with a certain kind of honesty. In between, I found time to be still. I sat in the reading corner and let the brass lamp draw its circle. I turned pages slowly and often simply looked out the window without making a note. My body had carried so much readiness that it needed practice in the art of doing nothing for 10 whole minutes. I set a timer the first day and laughed at myself for needing permission in the form of a bell. By the 3rd day, I no longer checked the time. The light did the counting for me. Messages arrived from the house in a new key. Noah sent photos of the children at the park, with jackets zipped to chins and cheeks red from wind. He sent one line and no questions. "We are okay today." I wrote back, "Good." Harper sent no messages for 2 days, and then a single sentence that said she was sorry for the way she had spoken, and that she was not asking for anything. I read it twice. I put the phone down and went to the market for lemons. When I returned, I wrote a note that said, "Thank you for the apology. No more labels on shelves. If you want to try again with words that honor all 3 adults, I will listen." I did not send it. Some notes are for the soul to read aloud in a voice the body can trust. Saturday's grief walk followed the river until the path grew quiet. We stopped under a bridge where the acoustics turned our breath into a soft chorus. People spoke sentences that did not require comfort, only hearing. A woman said she missed a mother who was still alive. A man said he had carried a story that did not belong to him since he was 5, and that he was ready to hand it back. When it was my turn, I said I was learning the difference between need and respect, and that my silence had become a doorway instead of a wall. The river sounded like agreement. That afternoon, Ruth knocked and held up a flyer for a small neighborhood potluck. "Bring anything or bring nothing," it said. We decided to bring the lemon tart that still made me blush with pride. We carried it through the courtyard like a small sun. People who had been faces became names. A woman named June told me she fixed typewriters, and another told me she could sharpen knives until they sang. Someone brought a stew that tasted like a family recipe and refused to explain why it worked, as if naming the trick would make it stop. We ate on paper plates and did not talk about who had paid for the lights. We talked about our favorite rain sounds and the last line of a poem that had saved someone in the night. When I came home, I stood in the doorway and looked at the shape of the room that had shaped itself around me. The chair, the lamp, the plant, the neat stack of folded dish towels, the folded throw at the end of the bed. Nothing was expensive. Everything belonged. I went to the desk and opened my notebook and wrote, "Today, I felt part of a circle that does not close to keep people out, but closes to keep strength in." Before sleep, I sent Noah a simple message. "The lemon tart was a success. Your daughter should help me next time." He replied with a row of stars and a sentence about the dragon letter. I placed the phone face down and turned off the lamp. In the dark, I could feel the circle of women as if it were a living ring of warmth around the city. Therese in her kitchen with the copy of the deed and a new plan, Nia with her chair by the window that loved her, Alma at her table writing next week's agenda with the care she gave to every small item that keeps a person from drowning, Ruth in her apartment watering basil and laughing at a television show that did not deserve that much laughter, me in my own bed with a spine that had stopped bending for a roof. I slept like a letter placed in the right envelope at last. Sunday morning, the city wore its quiet face. I brewed coffee and opened the window so the cool could iron the wrinkles out of my thoughts. On the table, the circle card Ruth had written for me waited like a small compass. Keep the pause. Meet Noah. Help 3 women. I touched each line with a fingertip, as if blessing it before the week began. By noon, I was back at the rec center with Alma, sorting a shoebox of forms a woman had carried in with both arms like a baby. Her name was Marianne. She had once owned a flower shop and now rented a room in the back of her sister's house. The box held receipts and letters and a contract written in a font that tried to be friendly and failed. We worked in silence for a while, sliding papers into families. Alma made tea and placed the cup near my elbow without breaking the rhythm. When we were ready, we found the page that mattered. It was a consent form signed on a day Marianne remembered being in bed with a fever. She stared at the date, then at the signature that looked like her own name walking with a limp. Her face changed the way rooms change when a light is turned on in the corner instead of the ceiling. She was not angry yet. She was awake. We built steps she could climb. Call the office that managed the contract, ask for the document history, request the IP address used for the digital signature. She wrote each step down in a hand that got steadier with every letter. When she finished, she smiled at me with the sudden shyness of a person who has been seen without humiliation. I told her she did well. She said she felt taller. Alma said, "Tall looks good on you." We laughed, and the laugh put color back in her cheeks. On my way home, I stopped at the shop that sold second-hand light and bought a small shade with a frill that would have embarrassed me last year. I liked it because it made the lamp look like it had dressed for joy. The owner wrapped it in paper and told me most shades think they are plain until they sit on a lamp that knows how to glow. I carried it home like a present I had earned. That afternoon I called Noah to confirm our next coffee. He asked if I could bring a photo of Dad for show and tell at school. The theme was heroes. I felt my breath catch and then release. I said of course. After the call, I took down a shoebox and lifted out a picture of my husband in a rain jacket, holding a ridiculous fish and laughing as if the clouds had made the joke. I wiped the glass and placed it beside the lamp, so it could make the room braver by simply existing. The door knocked once. Ruth stood there with a plate of cookies she swore were healthy because they contained oats and optimism. We ate 2 and saved the rest. She asked about the circle, and I told her about Marianne. She shook her head at the audacity of people who think signatures are costumes. Then she asked the question she had been holding. Have you decided about the account after the first season? Not yet, I said. I will keep the pause until I can hear my decision without anger standing behind it. She nodded, as if I had given the answer to a riddle that often goes wrong. That evening, I wrote letters I did plan to send. One to the advisor, confirming the next check-in. One to Alma, thanking her for trusting me with other women's paper. And one to myself, the kind we should be given at 13, and again at 40 and again, whenever a roof forgets who paid for the shingles. I folded my letter and slid it into the notebook like a seed that would not need water to grow. Monday brought weather that could not decide. Sun, then mist, then a brief patter that crossed the street and left. I walked to the market for lemons and pepper and a bunch of parsley that smelled like green courage. On the way back, I passed a thrift table where a little boy sold used marbles in a jar and called them worlds. He asked if I wanted to buy a world. I said I already had one, and he nodded with the seriousness of a philosopher and said, "Good, then buy one for a friend." I bought 2, and placed one on my desk and one in my pocket for the next woman whose voice shook while she told the truth. At noon, a message came from Harper that was only 2 sentences long. I am trying to understand. I am willing to talk when you are. The words were not wrapped in requirements. I stared at them, the way you stare at a river that has stopped flooding and begun to find its banks. I did not answer. Not from pettiness. From care. Words that arrive clean deserve a clean reply, and I was not yet clean of the old ache. I closed the phone and went back to chopping parsley, and the knife made a steady whisper across the board. In the afternoon, Alma asked if I could meet a woman named Rena at the library. We sat at a corner table while rain pressed its soft face to the high windows. Rena had spent years sending money to a brother who promised to pay her back when his business found its feet. The business had learned to crawl, not to walk. She did not want to stop helping, but she wanted to breathe. We made a circle on paper that showed what came in and what went out, and what could be spared without borrowing against sleep. When we finished, she said she felt guilty and relieved, and that both felt like a storm that might finally rain itself out. I gave her the spare marble from my pocket. She laughed and placed it in her purse as if it were a talisman with directions. By the time I reached home, the sky had cleared and the maples glittered like green coins. I set the new shade on the lamp. The room changed temperature by a degree I could feel in my chest. I made a simple stew and ate it with half a heel of bread, and thought of how often hunger has nothing to do with food. After dishes, I placed the shoebox of photos on the table and chose 3 for the children. Dad with the fish, Dad asleep on a couch with a tiny Noah on his chest, Dad and me, painting a wall that would need repainting and not mind at all. I slipped them into an envelope and wrote Noah's name in neat letters that did not wobble. Night came with a breeze that smelled like the river. I sat in the reading chair and let my body be a body without tasks. The phone buzzed once more. A photo from Noah of the children under a blanket fort that sagged in the middle because I was not there to tie the knot, only I knew. They looked at the camera with the bold joy children keep, even when rooms are colder. I sent back a heart and a note that said, "Teach them to build the knot in the middle." He replied that he was learning and that the blanket kept falling, and that they all laughed until the dog decided it was his house. I could see the joke across the distance and let it warm me. On Wednesday, the circle gathered again, smaller this time, just 4 of us at a long table with elbow room for grief and relief. Nia read a poem she had written in the early morning about a window that loved her back. Her voice shook on the first line and steadied on the last. We clapped softly and she bowed as if a stage had opened under her feet. Therese reported that the lawyer had filed and the bank had frozen what needed freezing, and that she had bought a plant on the way home because the house wanted something alive that could not be lied to. Marianne called in with good news about a document trail and an appointment with a clerk who had promised to listen like a person and not a machine. Alma wrote everything down on the big paper she uses when she wants victories to look official. After we cleaned up, Alma handed me a thin folder with my name on the tab. It held only 3 pages, a schedule of circle dates, a list of women who had asked for help, and a blank sheet titled Notes for Indigo. She laughed at herself for the title and said, I could throw it away if it made me itchy. I said it did not. It felt like a small altar. I placed it in my tote, beside the notebook, and the pen that writes even when held upside down. On the way out, Ruth asked if I had heard from Harper again. I told her about the message. She said, sometimes people need to feel empty before they can fill with something better. We walked to the corner in step. She turned left, and I turned right. I watched her go for a moment, and felt grateful for the ordinary miracle of a neighbor who appears at the exact size of your day. Thursday morning, the advisor called to confirm a small administrative note. His voice had the lightness of a person who has seen storms pass without pretending the sky is always kind. We updated nothing and affirmed everything. Before he hung up, he said this sentence the way a doctor says a line he knows matters. You are allowed to change your mind later. Power is also choice. After the call, I stood at the window with my palm flat on the glass, the way people do when they are not sure if they are praying or stretching, and decided that either way, the gesture helps. I met Noah in the afternoon. He brought the children and the dragon letter with a new drawing. We sat on the back patio of the cafe and watched the river move with the weight of places it had been. The children climbed on the bench and brought me leaves as gifts. Harper did not come. No one spoke badly of her. The lack of her name in the air felt like a kindness we were offering each other. When it was time to go, my grandson asked if I would come to the school assembly when he held up the picture of his grandpa in the rain jacket. I said yes. Noah smiled and put his hand on my arm and said thank you. The thank you did not wobble. That night I laid out clothes for the assembly and polished the glass on the frame until my husband's grin could have lit a closet. I wrote 2 lines on a small card for our grandson to carry in his pocket in case his courage needed a friend. This is my grandpa. He taught me that brave means telling the truth and laughing at rain. Before sleep, I sat at the desk and opened the folder with my name. I wrote 3 notes on the blank page. Keep the pause until spring. Keep the coffee with Noah. Keep helping women read their paper until the ink stops trying to lie. The lamp, with its jaunty shade, spilled a gentle light that made the letters look settled. I closed the folder and felt it thrum with a quiet that had nothing to prove. I slept and dreamed of chairs. Not thrones, not pews. Simple chairs in circles and kitchens and libraries. In the dream, each chair had a name written under it. Not the name of the owner, the name of the feeling it promised to hold. Courage, rest, clarity, belonging. I sat in each and felt the promise keep itself. Morning came, and the world did not argue with my place in it. I brewed tea and watered the basil and tucked the marble into my pocket for whoever needed a world that day. When I stepped into the hall, Ruth's door opened at the same moment. She lifted a hand in a small flourish and said she had a joke I would like. I laughed before she told it, because sometimes laughter itself is the point. On the way down the stairs, I thought about circles and how they do not have corners where dust hides. I thought about the house I left, and the chair I painted, and the child who would hold up a picture of his grandpa and say a sentence that could move a room. I thought about my silence, and how it still worked as a tool without turning into a weapon. I stepped out into the morning and felt the day fit. The maples held their appointments. The river kept its long conversation with the sea. Somewhere across town, a woman opened a drawer and found a folder with her name, and felt her spine remember itself. I touched the marble in my pocket and smiled. Then I walked toward the school, carrying a picture in which a man laughed at rain, and a life in which I did not need anyone to tell me where my seat was anymore. The school gym smelled like lemon cleaner and cardboard, a scent that took me back to every assembly I had ever sat through as a mother, and then as a woman who learned to sit a little farther back. Children filed in like bright birds, their paper crowns from art class saved for an occasion that did not exactly require them and yet made everything better. The stage had a banner with block letters that read, "Heroes Among Us." Folding chairs waited in neat rows that would turn crooked the second the first applause rose. I found a seat near the aisle, so the children could see me when they wanted to brag with their eyes. Noah waved from the far side of the gym. He looked rested for the first time in weeks, which meant he only looked a little tired. He held up the envelope I had given him and patted the pocket as if the picture might try to leap out early. I smiled. The brass lamp from my desk flashed across my mind, the way it draws a circle and asks the page to be brave within it. I touched the edge of my scarf and let the gym become a room I knew how to sit in. The principal welcomed us and explained that each child could hold up a photograph and say one sentence about their chosen hero. The instructions were simple by design. Children know how to make a world out of a sentence. I watched as one boy held up a picture of his grandmother in a uniform and said she could carry a person down the stairs and still remember to feed the cat. I watched a girl hold up a photo of a librarian and say that he taught her how to look for things without getting lost. We clapped 100 soft claps, the kind that respect the size of young courage. When my grandson's class took the stage, he looked for me first. He found me. The look steadied both of us. Noah put a hand on his shoulder. The teacher nodded. A dozen children spoke small sentences that sounded like prayers disguised as facts. Then my grandson lifted the frame, and the gym lights caught the grin of a man in a rain jacket who laughed like the sky worked for him. "This is my grandpa," he read from the card we had practiced. He taught me that brave means telling the truth and laughing at rain. He stood there for a heartbeat longer than any other child had, not because he needed to, but because he understood that some sentences deserve a sip of silence after them. Then he smiled and sat down. Noah kept his face still and then gave up trying. I breathed out through my nose to keep my cheeks from turning into a river. The principal kept moving, as principals must. The program unfurled its careful order, but something in the room had shifted, a little hinge opening in the back of the mind that lets air in. After the assembly, children poured into a soft chaos of proud families. Noah brought the kids to me, and they pressed into my coat like small, determined animals. We admired every hero photograph within reach. We promised to remember the librarian and the cat. We promised to try laughing at rain, even on homework nights. Harper was not there, and that absence sat between us without a label. It did not feel like a missing brick. It felt like a doorway no one was ready to step through. On the walkway outside the gym, the air was bright and honest. We agreed on Coco. Noah walked with the careful pace of a man learning a second language of love, slower, more precise, willing to sound strange to be understood. At the corner, I handed him the envelope with the other 2 photos and said they should sit where the children could reach them. He nodded. He tucked the envelope into his coat and said he would find a frame they could touch without being told to be careful. At the cafe, the 4 of us took a small table and pretended it was big enough. The children asked for extra whipped cream and received a lecture about moderation that neither of us meant. I watched Noah as he stirred his cup and did not speak for a while. Silence can be a kindness in public places. He looked at me, and then at the children, and then at the window where a man in a yellow hat walked a dog that thought it ran the block. He said he was proud of his son for standing still long enough to let a sentence do its work. I told him that stillness is a skill best taught by people who finally learned it. When we parted, he hugged me with both arms and did not say sorry or please or what if. He said next week, same time. I said yes and meant it. The children kissed my cheeks and left whipped cream on my skin like ceremonial paint. I walked home slower than usual. The Maples were in a mood to preach about patience, so I let them. When I reached my building, Ruth had taped a note to my door that contained 2 words and a drawing of a lemon. Slice joy. I left the note there and laughed every time I passed it, the good laugh that does not check the hallway first. The next morning brought a message from Harper. It arrived like a stone placed on a table without drama. I am ready to talk. I will listen. I can meet you at the cafe by the river on Thursday if you are willing. There was no list attached. There was no theory about boundaries disguised as tenderness. I read the message twice and then set the phone down as if it were a cup full of something hot. I wanted to drink slowly. I walked to the window and touched the glass. Cars moved like promises that sometimes arrive and sometimes do not. I could hear my own breath in the pain. It was steady. I picked up the phone and typed a sentence that did not bargain. Thursday at 2. Neutral ground. 1 hour. We will talk about respect first. I pressed send and felt the apartment approve of my manners. I told Ruth. She put on a serious face and then ruined it with a grin. Bring the marble, she said. Give her a world she might not expect. I slipped the small glass world into my pocket, and it felt right there. A cool reminder that conversations change shape when both people walk in with their hands visible. Before Thursday, I kept the days simple on purpose. I met Alma and Therese, and we read a letter from the lawyer that used words like proceeding and satisfied and redacted. Therese cried for exactly 19 seconds and then smiled with her teeth, like a woman who had remembered the purpose of teeth. I sat with Nia by her window, and we watched a storm come in from the west. She said the word no twice into the room, and then laughed, and the laugh had a little thunder in it. I met Marianne at the library, and the clerk was kinder than any of us had dared to hope. Paper does not always win the first round. Sometimes it wins the second in a room with fluorescent lights, and a clerk with the face of a saint who knows better than to look like one. Each evening, I turned on the brass lamp and wrote a few lines in my notebook, nothing more ambitious than a record of small mercies. A woman at the market said she liked my scarf and meant it. The basil looked greener after I moved it 2 inches to the left. I slept with the window open a finger and dreamed not of doors but of porches. In the dream, people sat and waved, and nobody asked who owned the steps. On Thursday, I arrived at the cafe early, sat where I could see the river, and kept my hands around a cup that steamed like a gentle animal. Harper came on time. She wore less armor than I had ever seen on her. No ring light eyes, no camera posture. She looked like a person who had made a mistake and was trying to meet it at the right height. She asked if she could sit. I said yes. We let the quiet introduce us again. She said thank you for meeting me. I said nothing. She continued in a voice that did not sell anything. I have been wrong in ways I did not want to see. I organized my life until there was no room left for people to be human. I used words like boundaries to hide the fact that I was afraid of losing control. I called you a guest in a house you built with your hands. I am ashamed of that sentence and all the smaller ones that led to it. I am not asking for money or for you to come back. I am asking for a chance to belong to a family that speaks to you like you are the person you still are. I let her finish without helping. Then I said what I had come to say, the words I had practiced under the lamp so they would not shiver. Respect comes before logistics. Respect comes before content and calendars and lists. I will speak to you as Noah's wife and as the mother of the children I love. I will not speak to a brand. I will not be managed. If you use my name in a room where I am not welcome, paper will remind you where the doors are. If you want to sit at a table with me and plan birthdays and weather and soups, I will sit and pass the salt. I spoke slowly enough that each sentence could stand on its own feet. Harper nodded and did not reach across the table. She said she had started therapy, and I did not roll my eyes because therapy sometimes saves a life that apology only bandages. She said she had told her followers nothing because this was not their story. She said she had paid the electric bill and the school and that Noah had taken on extra work and that he had told her the thing he should have told her years ago, which was that his mother had a name inside the house that did not require introduction. She said she was sorry again, but differently this time, like a person placing water where a field had burned. I took the marble from my pocket and set it on the table between us. It caught the light and threw it back in a tiny circus. This, I said, is for the days when the world you built on a screen feels like the only world. Carry this one in your coat. Remember that the small, round truth is heavier than the story you can edit. She smiled with the humility of someone who knows she is being forgiven only for the next step, not for the whole road. She said thank you and did not try to make it bigger. We set a time for a short visit with the children at the park on Sunday. Neutral ground, 2 grown women, no lists. If you change your mind, I said, the marbles will not roll off the earth. She understood. We left with cups empty and a silence that did not stab. On my walk home, the river looked like it had decided to enjoy being a river. The wind lifted my scarf and then behaved. At my door, a small package waited. Inside were basil seedlings, with a note from Ruth that said, "This is how you multiply what feeds you." I lined the little pots on the windowsill, and the apartment smelled like a kitchen where nobody is trying to win. Night came early, the way autumn teaches you to put your lamps on a little sooner. I opened the folder with my name and wrote a new action under the others. Hold the door open to the future, 1 inch at a time. I closed the folder and set my hand on the cover the way you bless a child without making it a ceremony. The phone buzzed. Noah. Thank you. The children are excited for Sunday. Also, the dog sat by the front door again at 5, and we all told him he could come to the park if he promised to behave. I pictured the dog practicing manners in a mirror and laughed alone in the room that did not mind. Before bed, I stood at the window and tried on a sentence I had once spoken in a different tone. I am home. I let the sentence expand and did not correct it. It did not need a street address to be true. It needed only this room, these plants, this lamp, this name I could say, without anyone else holding it for me. I slept with the window open to the exact width of my palm. The night visited and left by its own path. In the morning the maples were brighter, and the basil had grown a little, because that is how things work when the light is simple and the water is clean. I brewed tea and wrote a note to the circle that said, "We are not here to make each other smaller. We are here to make rooms where a person can bring their whole voice without asking where to sit." The echo of my silence had traveled and done its work. It had crossed a house and a river and a grid of bills. It had taught a child a new sentence and returned my son to a seat that fit him. It had unlocked doors without slamming them. It had changed nothing about the truth, and everything about how the truth was treated. I poured the tea and sat down, not as a guest, not as a manager of other people's ease, not as a shadow or a sponsor or a system. I sat down as Indigo Hodges, a woman who knows the weight of her own name and can carry it without asking anyone to write it on a label. The room approved. The lamp agreed. The basil breathed. Outside, the river said the same word it always says when you stop pretending it is complicated. Yes, Sunday came with a sky that looked freshly washed. The park smelled like wet grass and bread from a vendor cart that arrived before the crowd. I reached early, as I had for every shift, every appointment, every promise I ever intended to keep. I chose a bench that faced the small pond where geese negotiated territory and children negotiated everything else. The river was near enough to be a rumor. Noah arrived with the children first. They ran and tucked themselves under my arm the way small animals look for their burrow. We talked about the new unit in science, a papier-mâché planet, a soccer scrimmage that had ended in fair arguments. The dog pulled Noah almost into the pond and then sat as if a judge had banged a gavel. I scratched his head and told him he could keep his place if he remembered that ponds do not belong in lungs. He wagged in a way that suggested he had understood philosophy at last. Harper walked toward us with a pace that did not ask for attention. She wore ordinary clothes and the face of a person who had turned a loud room down to hear a soft voice. She greeted the children first. She greeted Noah. Then she turned to me and said my name simply. As if speaking to a neighbor she hoped to know properly. I nodded and moved aside so she could sit. The bench was long enough for boundaries and beginnings. We talked about the dog's insistence on claiming 2 squirrels at once. We talked about the smell of bread and how it can make a person believe life is manageable. We talked about the children's drawing of the house with 2 chairs facing a window. Then Harper drew in a steady breath. "I am not asking for the account," she said. "I am asking for a place in a family where I do not need a camera to be seen. I am learning what apology means when it does not immediately drive a bargain." I let the words land. I looked at Noah. He did not try to translate her or save her. He only stood as if ready to be useful when called. I told Harper what I had decided in the quiet of the apartment, where respect holds the lease. I will not move back. I will not manage your budget. I will not be a prop in a story you need strangers to approve. I will help with the children when asked with respect, and I will meet at neutral places until our conversations can live in rooms without checking their posture. She nodded and did not argue. I saw the small work happening behind her eyes, a woman correcting old lines with a pencil and an eraser, agreeing to leave smudges visible because honesty sometimes looks like that. She said she had told the children that I had found a home that fit my bones and that love is not a room you leave. Love is a person you carry without tightening your fist. The sentence was hers. I gave it room. Then I said thank you. The children asked for bread. We walked to the cart and stood in a short line that moved like a patient animal. We ate at the edge of the lawn with our hands. The dog waited for crumbs and received a sermon instead about grain and discipline. Noah paid. Harper did not take a picture. The world kept turning and did not demand a caption. After a while, the children ran to the swings and counted pushes like spells. Noah followed to watch. Harper and I remained on the bench. She told me she had begun therapy on Tuesdays and that the woman had already told her she uses the word system when she means control. We sat with that until it stopped clanging. She asked if she could apologize for the labels on jars and shelves. I said, "Yes, you may apologize for all of it, and then we will not make lists of sins the way we made lists of groceries." She laughed softly. The laugh of a person who knows a ledger is only useful for numbers. We spoke of the electric bill and the way a house hums when the current is honest. We spoke of the school portal and how tuition now came from their account and how frightening and strengthening it felt to make money stand up and identify itself. None of this was dramatic. That was the point. Ordinary repair is how homes are actually built. When we said goodbye, Harper did not reach for a hug. I appreciated the restraint. We agreed to meet again in a week with the children. As she walked away, she turned and offered one more sentence. "I will not use your name without your voice in the room." It was the right promise. I did not bless it. I did not doubt it. I let it be a step. Noah stayed back as the kids ran ahead. He asked if he should bring the dog to coffee next time, so we could witness him behaving in public. I said yes, and we both laughed because the dog and the word behaving do not always share a map. He thanked me for the way I had left without screaming. I told him silence can be a scalpel or a shield, and that I had tried to use it as the second. He said it had worked. He said he did not feel cut. He felt stitched. The wind shifted, and the pond smelled like an old summer. I walked home by the long path that lets you see the river twice. At the second bend, a boy threw a stick into the water and yelled, "Go where you want." The stick obeyed. I reached my building and found a paper bag on the mat with a note from Ruth in her round hand. 3 lemons, 1 basil cutting, 1 secret. The secret was a recipe scrawled on the back for a dressing made of crushed anchovy and a squeeze of something bright. She had written optional next to the anchovy, as if permission were a seasoning. In the apartment, the brass lamp waited with its steady circle. I set the lemons on the counter like planets that had finally found their orbits. I watered the basil and set the cutting in a jar. The plant looked like ambition at a civilized scale. I changed into a sweater that knew my shoulders and made tea. The quiet greeted me and did not demand a report. In the afternoon, Alma called with a simple question. "How is your heart?" Not "how are your plans?" Not "what is the status?" "How is your heart?" I told her it was calm. I told her it felt like a tide pool, small and vivid, and holding its own life even as the larger sea pulled and pushed. She made a pleased sound that I had begun to recognize as her version of applause. She told me Marianne had received a call from the clerk, who promised to escalate, that Nia had hung a small wind chime by her window, and it sounded like a coin that had decided to be music, that Therese had signed a paper that began to untangle the rest. I wrote these 3 sentences on a card and taped it inside the cupboard with the robin drawing. Let good news live where the spices are. That way, when you reach for flavor, you also reach for proof. Toward evening, a message from Harper arrived. No requests, no declarations. Only a photo of the kids bent over a puzzle on the rug, and the dog asleep with his chin on the missing piece, as if he had chosen a metaphor on purpose. Under the photo, she wrote, "We are trying." I replied with a lemon emoji, because words were not needed, and also because Ruth would approve. Later that night, I pulled the folder with my name from the desk and opened it as if it were a book I loved. I added a note on the first page under the timeline of the last few months. Pause maintained, review in spring. Boundary respected in practice, not only in speech. I closed the folder and felt it thrum with the low sound of a thing done correctly. I set the table for one in a way that would have made my mother proud. Plate centered, fork on the left, knife and spoon keeping their side of the piece. I cooked pasta with the anchovy dressing despite the optional note, because sometimes salt that once swam is exactly the salt a person needs. I ate slowly. I felt fed. When the dishes were drying in their small congregation, I took out my notebook and wrote what I wanted to remember when winter arrived and the early dark tried to persuade me that I had made a mistake. I wrote that leaving is not the opposite of love. I wrote that silence can teach louder than anger. I wrote that paper is power only when the person holding it chooses to align life with ink. I turned off the overhead light and let the lamp hold the room. It made every corner look like a promise kept. I thought about chairs again, and the dream where each seat had a name for a feeling it was built to hold. I decided my chair would be labeled, "Welcome back to yourself." I sat in it and let the words do their work. The next day, I met the circle at the rec center. Alma read a short poem about a woman who keeps a spare key in her shoe, not because she expects to be locked out, but because she enjoys the knowledge that she always has a way in. We went around and spoke small progress. Nia had said no to 3 things, and yes to an hour of dancing in her kitchen. Therese had mailed a certified letter and slept for 6 hours without waking. Marianne had purchased a folder with her own name on a label that looked like a small flag. I shared slightly. Park. Bread. A sentence that I had not had to repeat. Ruth brought basil seedlings for everyone and called them green commas for run-on weeks. We laughed and tucked the plants into tote bags. As we left, Alma pressed a tiny envelope into my hand. Inside was a card the size of my palm, with one line written in her slim, certain pen. Peace is not a gift from other people. It is what remains when you stop spending yourself on rooms that do not pay attention. I walked home slowly and let the city make its low music around me. A bus sighed. A child sang to a stroller. Somewhere, a trumpet practiced scales and almost found joy. I climbed the stairs and set the seedlings on the sill. The apartment smelled like possibility steeped in lemon and tea. I texted Noah that I would see him Tuesday and asked if the dog had mastered the art of being a gentleman. He sent a photo of a chewed shoe and a caption that read, "We have more work to do." I laughed until I had to sit down. Night lifted itself over the building like a careful blanket. I stepped onto the balcony with my cup and watched the river. It did not hurry, it did not display. It moved with the confidence of something that has always known its own direction. The echo of my silence returned to me across the water, softer now, finished with its errands. I said my name out loud. The way you test a diaphragm after repairing a machine. Indigo Hodges. The air carried it and gave it back. I did not whisper. I did not shout. I spoke the way a person introduces herself at a table she built and then invited others to share. The sound felt correct in the mouth. I went inside and turned off the lamp and let the dark become a companion rather than a test. The basil breathed. The chair kept its promise. The folder slept in the desk. Somewhere across town, a switch went on without panic. A child set a photograph in a frame. A man who used to hurry sat still for a full minute before speaking. A woman who used to film everything made soup without telling anyone. I crawled into bed and felt the mattress accept me without conditions. My last thought before sleep was exact and needed no translation. I am not a guest. I am home.